Hello.
Hey Robert, how you doing?
I'm doing okay. Just trying to figure this stuff out here.
Yeah, no, I couldn't figure it out a second ago either. Happens.
Uh, cool.
I just made you the host, Robert, because I was hoping maybe it would allow you to.
Oh,
Yeah, there
okay,
you
yeah.
go. Now you
So
can
I don't
hear me.
really know how this works, but technology is not my strong point. More
Yeah, I
of a
mean,
more of a 20th century person, but
if it was, I'd probably do these live on YouTube, but I can't figure out how to link it, so that's all right. People enjoy it once it goes on, so it's fine.
it's all good. So let's see. So can you hear me okay?
Yeah, sounds great.
Okay. Trying to think of how I could get more light in here. I guess it's as good as it's gonna get.
Oh, it looks pretty good.
I don't have a studio exactly.
Yeah, me either. I'm I'm in my back room. I'm still working on it.
It's hilarious. So what are we doing? Are we live or are we there?
Yeah, we're there. You can just start on whatever topic you wanted to go with tonight. We didn't really pick one, but I know you said we had a lot to talk about, and I've seen all your recent shows with the church. I don't know if you want to bring up any of that stuff as a topic, but whatever you feel like talking about, we can just wing it.
No, I think that's a great place to start because what this is about, um, for those of you guys out there, I know you've been following it, but the whole relationship between Second Peter and Jude, the connections between Second Peter and Jude, and what you see in the seven letters of Yeshua to the churches in Asia, right? For those of you who've been following up on this, um, I sort of summarize it every time because I'm sort of in that position. I'm always having people who come into the church just sort of on the day, or maybe hadn't been there for a while or whatever, and I have to kind of get them up to speed. But it's been good in a way because it's kind of forced me to speed up my presentation, to just kind of encapsulate it, and you try to make some progress. But the interesting thing about it is the way that it does progress. You know, um, Evidently what you have represented there between Second Peter and Jude, just those two writers, is that you have the usage of Jude. The way it starts out, actually, if I can find the, hang on, I got my little brothers here. I can find let me see if I got it right here. The way the actual book starts out, I've made a conflation between Second Peter and Jude, which I guess I'll just use that. It's just as well. Maybe I'll tack it on at the end of the video once it's put up so people can read it for themselves. Um, but the idea is that apparently Jude's urging of us to fight for the faith that was once for all delivered to the saints. That this isn't just some request or whatever, but this is something that is so central, such a central mystery, such a vital thing in Christianity that literally must be understood. That the whole idea is that everything is sort of encoded, um, in a way that it wouldn't be understood for a certain period of time, and then it would be understood again by means of remembrance. And what's interesting about this, and what's usually part of the daily spiel or whatever, when I try to get people up to speed, is that um, the book of Enoch exists, in our world or whatever, has existed in in English or whatever for like almost 200 years now. Was
Hmm.
it 1873? And
Yeah.
yeah, I mean, maybe even over that, depending on where it was available. you
Right.
know but the idea is, one of the interesting things that it says about itself is that it's not for his generation, but it is for a remote one which is to come, which is at the time of the removal of the wicked and the ungodly. And Jude makes that exact same point. He says that the quote that he uses, the way he bolsters it's very interesting, because in connection with his basic statement that we have to fight for the faith that was once for all delivered to the saints, you have to understand that these extra biblical works were what he was talking about. That the idea is what do they exist for? On some level, it's just a test of whether or not you take God at his word or not. On some level, it's just that. Like let's say that your evaluation of these books is, this or that, the other, or whatever. But the question is, yea, hath God said? You know what I'm saying? And
Yeah.
that was the original problem, was that people distrusted what God said. And it's interesting too, because you see this even among the prophets. You see this among Moses and his reticence to do what God told him. Um, in various points, most of the prophets have sort of questioned God or resisted God on some level or other. Um, and it's interesting to see just how human these people are, you know.
Right.
But they're the idea is that what is in man is it is in man, I guess, to question God. And even the greatest of these examples, you have examples of men questioning God, second guessing God. Abraham laughed when he was going to have Isaac, or Sarah also. These people had questions, they had doubts, and when God said he was going to do something, people entertained questions about it, or people questioned it to the point where they laughed, you know as if to say that that there's something we have to say about it. Like when God says something, it just happens. It's just he's always telling the truth. You know
Hmm.
what I'm saying? And that our take on things is so different that there's a very essential truth that gets lost in theology. Um, when Jude says, for example, he cites the source. He says in Enoch also the seventh from Adam, right? And he emphasizes his antiquity, right? It's a data point. It's like a literal bullet point. This is the book. It is ancient. It is prophetic, right? It bears on my age, right? Because it is prophesied of these men, right?
Hmm.
And also it bears on the time of the removal of the wicked and the ungodly, because the quote he gives is, behold, the Lord cometh with 10,000s of his saints to execute judgment upon all, and to convict all that are ungodly among them. See, so it's the power and the coming of our Lord, right?
But I was
And
I was listening to your work, one of your works this morning. I forget which one it was. It was like unlocking the scriptures or something like that, and it was one of your like quasi older works. I think maybe 10 years ago, and brought up an excellent point. Is that Jesus calls Peter the rock because he says this is, Petra, because he's the rock that he's going to build his church upon. And we think today, because of what we've been taught, that somehow Peter is like the father of the church and it's passed down through apostolic lineage. But you said that's not true, and it isn't. And really, what he's saying, in my opinion, is that, like you say, is that Peter, because it says in the Bible that um, out of the mouth of two or three witnesses shall a matter be established. Now, if you take the two, that's the canon, the Old and the New Testament. But it says out of the mouth of two or three witnesses. So if you take three, that's the third testament. That's all the books that were taken out. And so or just marginalized or never found because they were buried and then dug up this past century. Like you said, the 1800s, we got Enoch, then we get the Nag Hammadi codices, then we get all the Dead Sea Scrolls and all that stuff to not only prove what we've had in the past was true, but also we got new documents and things like that. So just going back to Peter, just based on your work alone, just your work alone, if you combine Jude and Peter, Peter becomes that father figure of a witness who's telling you you need to listen to what Jude is saying, because Jude is telling you that Enoch is okay to read and it's important to read. And now then you go into Enoch and you find out that it says that this book isn't for that generation, but a remote one that is to come. Then you find out, well, that means it's for us, because we are the only remote generation it can be for, because we're the fig tree generation, because it says in the year 1948, when Israel becomes a nation, that generation won't die before the Christ returns. So like you said, Usher's chronology, or whatever chronology you want to use, basically that says the same thing, that this is the last generation. And like you said, look at the world, look at the fallen angel. Like everything is fallen angel tattoos and people's, stickers, and everything is angels and good angels and bad angels, and even anime, and anything that even Star Wars, anything that you see is good versus evil, good versus evil, good. There's no other paradigm. So it's just interesting that you found that you can combine Jude and Peter to create a whole nother text that just gives you that third dimension of what Jesus had already said, is that Peter is going to become this foundation for which all other scriptures open up to what we're talking about. So good.
Well, yeah, and we'll see, this is the interesting thing about it. So remember what I just said about what Enoch said, that it was not for his generation, but was for a remote one at the time of the removal of the wicked and the ungodly, right? So he leaves it off on that note. Like, in other words, like, this book is going to be in effect at the time of the removal of the wicked and the ungodly. It's a statement basically that he makes, that this book will be in effect, it will be scriptural, and it will be, you know what I'm saying? That's his assertion. Now, I mean, a critic or whatever, they could believe it or not. A Muslim, an atheist, they could believe it or not. But the fact is, that's the data point that he leaves in this in the writings. That's what his assertion is. And so if you look at it purely at a literary level, that is his statement. But what's interesting about that is when you reflect upon what Jude and Peter together work to do, right, it is to create a mechanism whereby the book of Enoch is mentioned in specific, right? Its antiquity is vouched for in a canonical book, right, by an apostle, and by, of course, the brother of James, at least, and Jesus, as is assumed.
But
Uh,
you could ask yourself, or other people could ask, well, what does it matter that we get Enoch back? Why is that important? But once you read the Gospel of Nicodemus and the Super Gospel, you find out, and it's in other books as well, that's in 4 different books. If you read one of Zen Garcia's books, tells you the 4 different books, that just the 4 that we know of, that tell you that Enoch and Elijah are the 2 witnesses. And that's a constant battle between people, that they say, no, Moses is one of the 2 witnesses because he was on the Mount of Transfiguration. But that's not even what the Mount of Transfiguration is about. It's about, showing you the past, the present, and the future. Moses, Jesus, and Elijah, and then you have John, James, and Peter. So you have like the old, the middle, and the new, which is another thing about the 3 testaments. It's just pointing to that. But in reference to the 2 witnesses, we are living in the time when the Antichrist is basically alive right now. It has to be alive right now, because we're at the end of time. And I mean, there's no possible way, according to the fig tree prophecy, that we could get past, like, let's just say the year 2028. Within that time frame, we're in 2024 now. We have a very short window. Even if we push it to 10 years from now, if you just want to go off whatever other things you think about, we're not far from the end of time. And so we get this book back. We're talking about this. The mechanism is open. We know about it, and we're teaching this. And you're in churches right now preaching this like it was said that it would happen. Now, like you said, if just a few of us do this work, it will catch on like wildfire. But like you said, if people like you see things go viral all the time. It's just this one little thing and it catches fire. And so people haven't had that happen yet. And in my opinion, that's because they're too consumed with this world and worldliness and ungodly things. And so once that is taken away, in my opinion, and people are desperately needing the truth of the gospel and the truth of the righteousness and things like that, they'll be searching, and they are searching for these things right now, obviously, but I think it's going to magnify. And so if you want to know why Enoch is important, is because as in the days of Noah, so shall it be in the coming of the Son of Man. So in the days of Noah, there were fallen angels and giants on the earth and things like that. If we start seeing that kind of stuff come into our realm, you're going to want to have the book of Enoch. Like everybody's going to be searching for it. They're going to be wanting that information. So if he's one of the two witnesses that are fighting in Israel against the Antichrist, you're going to probably want to read one of his books, is all I'm saying. So it does have valid importance for this time.
Well, see, but this is about Second Peter and Jude acting as a delivery system.
Right.
It is a mechanism that exists within the canonical New Testament that people who call themselves Christians basically are bound to uphold and to adhere to,
Right, exactly. Their
and
own
to
canon says
abide
it,
by,
so you can't deny it. Right.
because that's the body of scriptures. But see, this is where the Bible's kind of very clever in a lot of regards. The the way in which the Bible, of course, as we know, it has a lower level meaning and a higher level meaning or whatever, but it speaks of faith and stuff like that, but it also speaks of knowledge. And there's an objective literary basis for what it is that I'm trying to present here so that people can recognize it, because it's something that literally you don't have to be a believer to see. Like you can recognize it outside of any framework of faith. Like anyone can understand it, like 1 and 1 is 2 or something like that. It's just something that you don't need to be a genius or whatever to understand. It just is there. It just is true. Something is eternal. It sort of has an eternal aspect to it. Like people ask, well, if God created everything, what created God, right? But then the obvious question is, the simplest thing you can understand is like 1 + 1 = 2, right? But then you ask yourself, when did that happen? When
Right.
when will that stop happening? When will it not be true? Truth is just something that transcends time and space. And so obvious questions like how can this be or whatever, right? They can be easily understood, but there's sort of a different context from our temporal reality. And so we have a hard time understanding that our temporal reality all stems from essential truths. Like there's nothing that happens outside of the framework of truth, right? Truth is the primary thing. Well, this is what they're trying to show us about the scriptures is the eternal nature of the scriptures. People talk about the scriptures as eternal. People talk about the scriptures as having the power to enlighten you. People talk, but this is enlightenment, right? This is taking it to a whole new level. It's taking it from something that people believe in and don't believe and argue about and whatever, when this is more of a seeing. This is more of a recognition. And this is the way the Bible talks about, like, as if you would know, whoever has ears to hear, let them hear, right? It's a whole other dimension of reality. It's adding that whole other level, uh, um the eternity. It's there to teach you about the eternity. And that's one of the things that Peter talks about too, is about the transformation into that divine nature that comes from understanding the error in your thought, right?
But
So,
it says in Revelation though that to him who overcomes this, basically this world, to him who overcomes will I give to eat of the hidden manna. And apocrypha means hidden. And apocrypha is these books, is these things that were taken away. Like for instance, this, I said this before, but this woman who's on a lot of different like YouTube channels and stuff like that, he says that one of the greatest things the devil did is he translated the Bible into Latin, and that's where we got the Dark Ages, so that nobody could read the Bible for a very long time during the Dark Ages. And you wrote this. I mean, this is your book, the Super Gospel that you compiled, and it says in this, in the Dissensus Latin A, chapter 9, then the Lord took Adam by the hand and delivered him over to the archangel Michael, and the saints all followed after him, who carried them into the wondrous grace of paradise. And the two most ancient ones, men who were full of days, approached them as they were passing through the gates. And this is Jesus in the underworld saving the saints while he was dying on the cross. He went into when he was in the tomb, after he died on the cross, he was in the tomb, and during those 3 days, this is where he went. It says, and the two most ancient ones, men who were full of days, approached them as they were passing through the gates. The holy fathers questioned them, "Who are you? For you have neither seen death nor gone down into hell, but have dwelled bodily and soul right here in paradise." And one of them replied, "I am Enoch, who was pleasing to God, and by the word of the Lord," which is Jesus, "was translated here. And the one that you see with me is Elijah the Tishbite, who was taken up in a chariot of fire. Never to this day have we tasted of death, for we are to remain alive until the end of the age. But we have been awaiting the arrival of the Antichrist, when God will send us forth to withstand him, that we might do battle against him with heavenly signs and wonders. He will then have to put us to death, but 3.5 days after killing us in Jerusalem, we will then be raised again. And after 3 days, we will again be taken up alive in the clouds to meet the Lord." Now it says right here, never to this day have we tasted of death. What does Peter say? Peter says that every man lives once and then the judgment. So if Peter says every man lives once and then the judgment, you see right there that these two men never die. So just thought I'd throw that in there.
Well, I mean, it's sort of that's sort of true on a metaphysical level, as well as on a scriptural level.
Right. A
The
lot of keys in there as well.
Well, one of the things that Peter points out is that it exists there as a light that shines in a dark place, right? And so when you think about, and that was what I was trying to get to earlier about the concept of eternity, like the way in which the word is eternal. That when he speaks of, like, I call the end from the beginning, right? Right. You get a
The Alpha and
sense
the Omega.
you get a sense of that through this
Mhm.
understanding, because you see when he speaks of the revelation, the further revelation, and then when you get that revelation, you see what I'm saying, then it is a demonstration of his power. And
Mhm.
it is transformative, because now you recognize, like it says in Diognetus, you recognize that you're living in a world where the creator is operative, and you have a recognition of the operations of his thoughts, right? And so these people at the beginning, they understood this stuff enough to write it down and to encode it and to save it for us. That was the first love of Christianity, was the central mystery, the faith that was once for all delivered to the saints. It involved things like apocryphal writings, it involved things like the hidden manna, right? But it was more than just that. It was about understanding the meanings of things. It was about understanding human nature. It was about transcending the flesh and being spiritual. I mean, you'll notice, like, people like Stephen, for example, um, he had the appearance, if you will, the face of an angel, right? He was there transcending before them, right? Living in that other world where he was actually, even though he was here bodily, he was seeing into heaven. And prophets have had this kind of experience, this transcendental sort of experience. To understand the eternity of those words is to give you that transcendence of this world, because everything you've been programmed with is kind of 2D, kind of compared to this. It's very mechanical, it's very, book learning, and you're sort of in a little isolated corner of reality of, the things you know versus the things you don't know, the experiences you had versus the experiences you didn't have. You're sort of a mishmash based on time and circumstance and attitudes and opportunities and all of the things that go into shaping your life. And we're all like that. And so we're all sort of very fragmented and different, right? We come from different backgrounds, we come from different walks of life, and all of those things are a function of things like our histories and our chemistry and things of that sort, that make us the way we are. I mean,
Well,
there's a certain
you
thing
grew
that
up an
goes into
atheist. You grew up an atheist, and I grew up in a Christian school, and I left all that because I didn't see the point, because it was so 2D. It was like blah to me. And then now both of us are having this fluent conversation in a language that only certain people can understand, really. And that's the power of God. That's the coming of our Lord. That's what this is.
but you're supposed to spread that understanding. See, this is why it makes it very easy, because, like what I was telling you with about Jude, is that they're kind of bullet points, right? You can point this stuff out to people and say, hey, listen, it's very simple. And it's in a way, it's very linear. The way in
Mhm.
which, okay, the way in which, okay, so imagine Jude going up to a crowd of people today. Like, in other words, if we were bringing Enoch to the people, what kind of expectation would we have from scholars and from people who are steeped in tradition? They would probably still not want to listen to us if we were to confront them, right? Which I don't know, maybe we should be doing that a little bit more. But I think we need to have the force of this understanding before we really step out. Although, put your hand to the plow also and just see what happens, because he's going to use us as his members. If it's his timing and it's his place, he's going to use you. And so people should actually, yeah, put your hand to the plow and do works. Um, because you never know. I mean, there's a lot of things that I learned just because I started out, endeavored to do things, like when I put these writings together and stuff like that, I never really quite know how it's going to end up. And then when I see the way it ends up, I see that it's more than just my hand in this. Then I realized again about the God that is operative in the universe. He actually lifts you out of the two dimensionality of your education and your own experience and your ego and that kind of thing. And the way in which you're taught about time and space is kind of wrong, because if there is a God that's transcendent of that, then it isn't linear, it isn't by chance or whatever. There's a whole other level of things going on that you're sort of de facto deceived about it, because even if it wasn't some tremendous cover up, just the sheer getting to the place where you could see that would be impossible because you didn't have that framework. But when you recognize that the Bible is that framework, right, by which you can bring about, for example, the removal of a book like the Book of Enoch, and structured within the Bible, there is a mechanism that is designed to actually do what that book says needed to be done. In other words, there's a cooperation, if you will, between the prophets
Well,
in order to bring this out.
Jesus said that it was that way though, because when he was being tempted by the devil said, "Take these two stones and make them bread. Make these two stones, take these two testaments and turn them into something edible." And Jesus said, "Man doesn't live on bread alone; he lives on every word that comes from the mouth of God." And if you only have 66 books, then that's not every word. So Jesus is telling you there's other words to go find, and he's saying that he's going to do that in the future, because the devil wanted him to do it right then, and he's saying no, wait. And that's what Enoch says. It's not for my time, it's for a remote generation. And then Peter and Jude come along and they're saying read Enoch, basically. You know what I mean? So it's all connected. All four of those things are connected.
Yeah, and so, but the way that the mechanism works, again, the big picture stuff here, the way that the mechanism works to bring Enoch back into the fold is very interesting, because again, it has a canonical basis. Second Peter and Jude are both canonical works, and so when Jude brings them the Book of Enoch, they obviously have questions with it, problems with it, right? Because the book is then subsequently brought to Peter, right? For which he gives answers for which you can derive the questions. In fact, you can very easily derive the questions. And what do those questions represent? Those questions that Peter is trying to answer are the questions that people had about Jude's usage of this book, right? It would be tantamount to saying, look, Jude comes up to us with this book, right, and tells us that he's ancient. He tells us that he's prophetic, right? He tells us that his prophecies bear on our age, and so on and so forth, right? We have questions about this, right? He says that he has this on the basis of the apostles, right? Because you know what I'm saying. So hey, let's take it to Peter because he's an apostle, right? And so when Jude is manifestly brought before him, again, as a structural aspect, what does Peter do, right? Well, again, he could say yes or no, or he could take a third route, right?
He
He could
waits.
be in, he could be direct or he could be indirect, right? Sometimes you can be very direct by being indirect, um, depending on how you do it,
But he
right?
said Jesus said he could shut these things up or he could open them up. He gave him the keys of heaven and earth, basically. So
Well, and see, that's just it. That's just it. He gave Peter. Peter evidently demonstrates this ability. This is what I'm saying. This is a demonstration of that key, because now the lock is unlocked. Now you can see into what he did. You see how he bound on earth, right? What was bound in heaven, and you have the ability to loose again by way of remembrance, by way of knowledge, right? So it's full on face to face knowledge that you have, because the light goes off and you're saying, oh, these are clues, these are breadcrumbs that these people are leaving us about what was going on at that time. What were the questions that they had? They literally, like, the way in which the scholars have approached what Jude and Second Peter means is entirely different from what I'm talking about, right? If you read any of those commentaries, or you read any of those footnotes or whatever that these people have, right, they're all along different lines. They're all along different pathways from what we're talking now, right? They're not affirming any of what we're saying. They're
Because
always
the Bible,
trying.
because Peter said that it's not for private interpretation. And when you go off on all these other tangents, it's all their private interpretation. But what we're talking about is God's interpretation, which is the correct way. So that's what it is.
Well, but see, that's the thing, though. Like I talk about the faith of a child, right? The mind of a child, right? The idea is that you just go along with what they're saying, rather than trying to fight what they're saying. You see, the if the theology states that Enoch is out, and you can't pursue those lines of reasoning, right? Um, you know, you either have it sort of in your head, or you have it in your hand. You either believe that you're really buying what they're selling. In other words, you really believe that the canon is this inspired thing, and that, in your mind and your heart, to veer off of that is, adding to or taking from, or however you want to, whatever fear mongering tactic has worked on you. You know what I'm saying, as far as that's concerned. Or you just, like, I'm just going to go along with what the establishment says because I don't want to rock the boat. I have my own feelings or whatever, but I'm sort of going to keep quiet about it or whatever. So, either with your head or your hand, you're following it, right? But the idea is, if you go the other way with it, and you just say, hey, listen, what if he means what he's saying here? You obviously, when sorry, I got my cat up here. Um, anyway, so where was it? Well, okay, so the question, I guess the thing is, they bring Jude to Peter, evidently, because Jude appeals to an apostle, right? He says the apostles brought us this message, right? So apparently the people had a question to that. So they bring it to the apostle Peter and ask him, okay, Jude says that you apostles teach this, right? Is this what you teach? Is this what you believe, right? Now, Peter's basically confronted with an issue. Like, he could say either, yes, this is true, right? This is what we teach, this is what we believe, right? In which case, you will have Peter seconding, what Jude was saying, right? And affirming Enoch and the assumption of Moses and all this other, you know, or he could say no. I mean, plausibly, if he disagreed with Jude, he could say Jude's a little bit off his rocker or whatever. I wouldn't go so far as to say, what I'm saying? But he evidently he takes a third route, right? Which is to say that he's going to say things, in he's going to say things like, in an offhanded sort of way that only you would only catch if you were looking for those clues, if you were looking to affirm him, right? I think if you're looking to negate Jude, I guess is what I'm really getting at, and you're looking to negate Peter, because the canon tells you that you can't affirm Enoch, right? And so you have to say, well, just because he quotes the one part of the book doesn't mean that the whole thing, he approves of the whole thing. Or if they try to introduce all these questions or doubts or whatever, right? It's because they've got you negating what Jude is saying, right? That's what you're missing. It's very subtle, right? You want to affirm the prophets, you want to affirm the apostles, right? You want to affirm what they're saying. So even if you are a scholar or you disagree with Enoch, right? Even if you think that Enoch is a pseudepigraphon, right? The idea that
Yeah, but
Jude is
right
quoting
there,
him,
that very word though is an insult because
yeah,
pseudo means fake.
yeah, that's right. Well, see, Peter addresses that too. That's what's so funny. All you have to do is change your thinking around to do you believe it or do you not believe it. All you have to do is change your thinking, change your postulate. Instead of saying that there's a canon and I'm limited and I have to negate what Jude is saying, you say no, you're not limited. You don't have these chains on you that you think you do, right? Those have been imposed from the outside, right? You have to understand who he is from the inside and what he's saying from the inside of everything that he's saying. And so so just the very fact that there exists a mechanism, like I said, like when Enoch says that he's for the time of the removal of the wicked and the ungodly, what is the verse that Jude uses? Behold, the Lord cometh with 10,000 of his saints to remove the wicked and the ungodly. You see what I'm saying? He uses that term. So boom, right there. That's a touchstone. He's affirming exactly what Enoch is saying about himself through that quote, right? And so there's your first clue, because that is there to inform you that this is for the reintroduction of this book into Christendom and to the world by means of Jude and Second Peter. That Peter is the key and Jude is the lock. You see what I'm saying? So the questions are brought to Peter. What are the questions? Is this a cleverly concocted fable? You see, oh, well, did the apostles actually send Jude with this letter? What did he say? He said that we did not follow cleverly devised fables when we told you about the power and the coming of our Lord Jesus Christ. What does he mean by the power and the coming of our Lord Jesus Christ, right? And Enoch also, the seventh from Adam, prophesied, saying, behold, the Lord cometh with 10,000s of saints to execute judgment. See, that's the power and the coming. So he's saying, when we came to you with the book of Enoch, talking to you about Enoch's prophecy about the power and the coming of our Lord Jesus Christ, right? You see what I'm saying? We were not following cleverly concocted fables. So why does he answer the question as to cleverly concocted fables? Because
they
the
were saying it
question
was fake.
was, isn't Enoch a cleverly concocted fable? So they bring Jude to Peter with the question, hey, did you, the apostles, approve of this? And is this or is this not some fable? Right? And Peter says, no, it's not a fable. And yes, we did approve it, right? So what does Jude say? To fight for the faith. And Peter evidently did, right? So it's an amazing insight, because what you have is Peter then, this is what's interesting, is a little bit later on in the letter, Peter not only talks about, well, I mean, that's an interesting sidelight too. I'll get into that in here in a minute. But the the interesting thing he brings up is he brings up about times of old, right? He talks about the old world, right? He mentions twice about the old world was destroyed by a flood, right? The world of old. But he also mentions prophets of old. So if the world of old means the antediluvian world, then the prophets of old also means the antediluvian world. So Peter is telling you that prophets of antediluvian times, and what prophet is even in question here, right? It's clearly Enoch, right?
Mm-hmm.
So when he says that prophets of old spake as they were moved by the Holy Spirit, right? That's also another answer to a
Well,
question.
it's kind of important because Enoch is called the righteous scribe, and he wrote 365 books. So if he wrote 365 books, the chances of them having more of them back then is a lot higher than us having the 4 that we have now. You know what I mean? So it's very possible that there was circulation, or at least discussion, especially, let's say, because you got to think about it. When Peter wrote his book, Jesus had already come back from the dead, right? So did Jude, right? They were like, when both of those books were written, Jesus had already come back from the dead. And if you read the Dissensus, Jesus went down to the underworld, and he was there with all the saints from Adam to the thief on the cross, fulfilling the 5,500-year prophecy that he gave to them back then, when Enoch was alive, basically, during the time, because all those people back then, they lived for like 900 years. That's like a 1,000 years they were living. So if they had all that time to tell their kids all these books and all these things, and they told it to Noah, because when Noah was born, his dad was so scared that he ran to Enoch because Noah lit up the room and stuff like that. You know what I mean? Because he was white, and he was like an albino looking dude, and he was like, "What the heck's wrong with my kid?" And he's and Enoch is the one that said, "Don't worry, he's fine. He's going to save the world, because him and all his kids are the only ones that are going to survive through this thing." You know what I mean? And then Og of Bashan is the only giant that's alive during that because he's in 5 different books of the Bible and 22 verses of the Bible. And then so you have the giants, which are only talked about really in the book of Enoch. So then we have, you know, the only reason that Og of Bashan was left alive is so God could be shown to be powerful because he wiped out all the other giants. And then so Og of Bashan is alive. He is not only saved by Noah, then he becomes a servant to Abraham, and then he's killed by Moses. You know what I mean? So that's a lot of the Bible that they don't even talk about the fact that a giant was alive during that time, and then he's alive all the way through as Israel's coming out of Egypt, and they have to destroy all those other lands and all the other things and go through all that time. So there's a lot of stuff in the Bible that Enoch is very needed for if you're going to have these types of discussions. So, like I said, if they're talking about this type of stuff, when Jesus has come back and he's on the earth for those 40 days or whatever from when he's crucified, and then he's on the earth and then ascends up to heaven, there's only a short, like you said, there's only a short window of time where they're talking to Jesus. Hey, what happened when you were down there? What went on? You know, we don't have those discussions per se, but I'm just saying, what did they talk about? So then you read Jude and you read Peter, and they're like kind of telling you, like, all these people are coming up to us and asking us questions about this kind of stuff, and they have the answers to it. Does anything I just said make sense? Like, this is the kind of stuff that I think about. Like they must have known that Jesus coming back they're like, dude, like if you're friends with me, if you and I were friends and something bad happened to you, you're gonna tell me I'm gonna say, what happened to you? What happened? So Jesus comes back to life after he was dead for 3 days. He's in the tomb. He comes back to life. He's going to tell them probably what happened in the underworld. He's going to tell them, or at least remember, all the people came back to life. Even Job was on the earth walking around in Israel, and all these saints were walking around in Israel. And if you read the Arco volumes, Caius and Annas and Caiaphas are talking about the fact we need to pay off the Roman soldiers, because actually it's in the Super Gospel too. They have to pay off the Roman soldiers and everybody else because they're starting to realize that Jesus really did rise from the dead. And all these patriarchs are on the earth walking around and stuff like that because they came back to life too. They don't talk about that stuff. You don't never hear that in church. So if all these people are on the earth walking around and stuff like that, where did you guys come from? Oh, we came from the underworld. Who was there? Oh, Enoch and Elijah were there. You see what I'm saying? Like, these are things that must have been talked about. And then they're going to Peter and they're going to Jude saying, is this book okay? Is Enoch okay to read? And they're like, yeah, but they can't say it that way. They have to kind of go around it and kind of hide it from them, from us, because it's not for like us to know until a certain time. Like this mechanism thing you're talking about, Peter had to keep it kind of hidden so that it could be saved for this later generation, the remote generation, which it talks about, which is us. Right? The best wine is saved for last, like Jesus did at the wedding. I'm getting ahead of myself. Go ahead.
Oh, well, yeah, but I mean, this is the point: is that it's trying to create again a means by which we can bring this about, that we can bring it into effect. And so there's a lot that's going to be revealed when this happens. There's volumes and volumes and volumes of these books to be read. And just right now in the scope of this discussion, he mentions a few. He mentions the Assumption of Moses. He mentions the book of Enoch. He also brings up the fact that Noah was a preacher of righteousness. But getting back to the topic at hand, just the way in which these books actually work together is supposed to bring us to the understanding, if you will, like it says in the Gospel of Phillips. This isn't just mere words, right? This is an actual recognition and realization of his eternity, because he speaks the end from the beginning, right? And that we live at the time of the end and understand those things properly, which were spoken again from the beginning, right? That he makes the last like the first. That like when Jesus says in the Gospel of Thomas, right? Why do you seek for the end? Have you yet found the beginning? Because the end is where the beginning is. The idea is that Peter says that those of you out there that this book is written to those of you out there who have discovered a like faith as what we have, right? The idea is that it is a return to that original knowledge. In the book of Jesus to the Ephesians, right, in Revelation, he talks about you have left your first love, right? The first love would have been this knowledge. It would have been this understanding. It would have been this first primary thing that there is no such thing. See, the way that mankind insinuated himself into religion was mankind tried to control religion. And one of the control mechanisms, one of the more fundamental control mechanisms was the concept of the canon. The idea is that I'm going to create a box of books over here that I'm going to sanction, right? And I'm going to present myself to you as if I am doing the right thing, that I am doing, you know what I'm saying? I'm going to try and limit your mind, right?
Mhm.
I'm going to try and bring you down, right? This is what the function of the canon does, is it limits your thinking. So every time you go outside of the traditional thinkings of men or the sanctioned teachings of your religion, for example, then you start, like, you start feeling this sort of separation, this guilt, if you will. It creates tension within the believer, that they're maybe going off off the rails or something, and that, like, they shouldn't be doing that, but it limits your thinking. But, like, if you just take them at their face value and you just say, when he says that he's ancient, he means that. When he says that he's prophetic, he means that. When you think about it, nothing could be more simple, and yet nothing could be more revolutionary. And so just a simple realization, like, it is so simple, it is so easy to see, it is so easy to recognize now in retrospect, once you have those eyes to see, once you have those ears to hear, it just belies the truth of the matter. You are talking about a God who exists outside of space and time, and who has control over space and time, because he told us that we would not understand these things at the end, and here it is at the end, and we understand these things. Then that is a recognition, that is a reading, if you will, of his power, that he has demonstrated to the nth degree, so much that the timetable is exact, the method is exact, the fact that it's so in your face obvious and should have been seen before. But that just belies the fact. And in Peter, he says, that it's that the truth is like a light that shines forth in a dark place, and that is very literally true. Because if it, with those exact words that have existed for 2,000 years, if all that needed to be done was you to just believe them, and to take what they said seriously, if that's all it was, then how could the failing not have been upon us? See,
Mhm.
the onus is on us. And that's funny how that works in English, because onus and on us are the same letters, right? But that's the truth. It is so on us to do this. And
Do you mind if I
you
just read
know
something in 2 seconds?
what's that?
Do you mind if I just read three things when you have one
Yeah,
second?
go ahead.
So I did this a while ago, and I just wanted to share it because it kind of has to do with what we're talking about, shining a light in a dark place. So the following three things are going to be from three different prophets in the underworld, in the darkness. These are all from the Dissensus, which we never had until recently, which was in Latin. And then first, I'm going to read it from the canon. So the following is from Psalm 24:7, and it says, "Lift up your heads, you gates, lift yourselves up, you everlasting doors, that the King of glory may come in." Now, nobody that would read the canon would have any idea what that really was talking about if you just read it as is. But this is what it's about. So this is from David in the underworld, from the Dissensus, Latin A and B. "Then another came forward who was set apart by your regal appearance. His name was David, and he cried out, 'You who are blind.'" Now think of this in our time too. When I'm saying all of these, think of their time and think of what we're dealing with right now. "You who are blind, do you not know that when I lived in the world above, I was the one who spoke the word? Lift up your gates, you rulers. I made known the mercy of God, even as I walked the earth, foretelling of the future joy, and also of his coming, saying, let them throughout all ages confess to the Lord of his tender mercies and the wonderful works on behalf of the sons of men. For he has shattered the gates of brass, destroyed the bars of iron, and raised them from their wicked ways. Now go ahead and speak if you'd like for a moment. I'm going to find Jeremiah.
Well, that's kind of a mouthful there. The where was I? So, but with what Peter is doing is not just affirming Jude, and he's not just affirming the book of Enoch. I mean, although he's doing all of those things, like what I was saying, the association made between the world of old being the antediluvian world and the association of his usage of prophets of old, right? Linking Enoch and the Holy Spirit, right? He's actually if you understand that, and see, that's another one of those themes that Peter brings up, is he brings up the idea that these people knowingly do what they're doing. He said it would have been better for them not to have known the way of righteousness than after having known it, to turn their backs on the sacred command that was handed down to them, right? So, in other words, there's a knowingness to all of this. This is something that people did with malice aforethought, right? So, in other words, you can easily imagine a scenario, because it's so easy to have people's trust, right? So you go along, you play along with somebody, and maybe they open up to you, maybe they show you something, maybe they tell you something, right? But then maybe you don't have the best heart out there, maybe you don't have the best intentions, right? So maybe you take that knowledge and you give it to somebody who's hostile or who wants to harness it and use it for their own purposes, right? So what you see is that what was happening to the apostles was that they were being marginalized. You see this throughout. But there's some explicit references to this marginalization that was going on against the apostles. Just the sheer fact that there's pushback against Jude, evidently, for him, the propriety perhaps of him using that book. The fact that there was pushback at all should be raising your antenna. Why are they bringing it then to Peter for Peter to get his opinion on it, right? Because yea, hath God said, right? Jude didn't say this, this isn't right, is it? And then Peter says, yeah, this is right. I'm going to take his book and I'm going to write around it. And I'm going to add my 2 cents here. I'm going to try to explain things the way in which would allow for this book to be reinstated at some point in the future. I'm
Yeah,
going
but
to include
like you
something.
said though, if we were going to use Jude, like Jude's really the only book that's kind of short enough that people would listen for a short amount of time, and you have to catch their attention quickly. So if you were preaching this in the street, Jude is kind of like 25 bullet points. You know what I mean? It's a fast intro, and I think that that's what allows you and me and other people that might preach this to introduce it to a new, like as you said, more people come into the congregation every week and you have to re-explain it every week and almost start from scratch. But you can do
Well,
that in a short amount of time because it's only 25 verses. So it's a great way to allow Peter to unlock it almost, if that makes sense.
Well, I mean, the elect is always in the plural. It's never just one person. People
Mm-hmm.
out there have it within themselves to make videos like you do, like I do, like many of us do, right? They have the power to do that. Peter also mentions in this that he gives us the essentially asserts that we have the power to speed his coming, right? So these are things we can do,
You
right?
explained it before. You explained it before that like the water is the key. Like water is one of the keys, and water is like the word, like the washing of the word. So like if you like, let's say a lot of times it talks in the Bible about dew. Like in a drop of dew is a drop of water, and when you take a drop of water and you put it on something, it magnifies it. Like you can see it through it. Like the light shines through it, and it magnifies whatever you're looking at. And this is from Isaiah's words in the Descensus. Says, "And the peoples of the earth and those beneath will rejoice as one, for the dew of the Lord will heal them all." So it's like once you concentrate and you allow yourself to see with those new eyes, that new vision, and you're not blind, like David had said earlier, then once you can see this or you can hear this with both ears, like you were mentioning, and you take the water and you magnify it, like to be able to see that third layer or whatever. That's what heals the nations. That's that healing of the nations, is that power that God has to allow those words to be magnified, if that makes sense.
Yeah, I sort of came upon that realization of do from my little macro photography days. It was another one of my deep discoveries about life, was just how much beauty was down there at the tiny level of the minutia, right? You know, you see little insects, you could see inside the flowers, you could see, you know what I'm saying, just to magnify stuff like that. But it only goes to underscore just how deeply intertwined truth is with everything else. It's absolute. It's not that truth is just a part of everything. It's just absolutely everything. Nothing exists but truth. Nothing exists outside of truth. And so it exists in the world of nature, but it also exists in the world of scripture. And that's what I'm saying. There's just that level of exquisite relationship in the scripture, as there is in nature when you look at it. Because, like, all of these things that I'm trying to point out and trying to suss out, like, what are the questions to the answers? People were like, well, uh, just by structure, did you as an apostle really endorse this? Because this is what Jude is pushing on us. So we're going to come back to you and with that question. So Paul has to reassert that yes, we the apostles did do this, right? In answer to their question. This is not some, when we came and told you about the power and coming of our Lord Jesus Christ as spoken of in the book of Enoch, in other words, right? We were not quoting to you cleverly concocted fables, but he takes it a step further. Luke informs us that one of the things they were talking about at the transfiguration, he sort of points out that they were talking about the events that were coming to place in Jerusalem. He points out about the crucifixion. And not only that, in Luke's version of it, when the voice comes from heaven, he says, "This is my son, the elect one, the chosen one." You know, he that's a term that's found in the book of Enoch. So that's a touchstone, right? But that's just Luke, right? So, but if if Peter then affirms by saying, "Listen, we were with him on the sacred mountain," and you already know some of the topic of the discussion, right? You know that what was discussed was that he was the elect one, that the voice from heaven declares him to be the elect one. We know what voice means. We understand this is the heavenly language. The voice from God declares him to be the elect one, right? And then um, add the piece about what was happening in Jerusalem, again from Luke. Again, it must be about his crucifixion, right? About the judgment, all the passion stuff, right? If they were talking about it at all, I'm sure that the cross came up, you know, and then Peter adds that when they were with him on the sacred mountain, right? Um, what does he say? Um, Yeah, he says, okay, so we had not followed cunningly devised fables when we made known unto you the power and coming of our Lord Jesus Christ. In other words, we told you about Enoch's prophecy, but we were eyewitnesses of his majesty, for he received from God the Father honor and glory when there came such a voice to him from the excellent glory, saying, "This is my beloved Son, in whom I am well pleased." Right? So the idea is that what was discussed in the book of Enoch was among those things that were discussed, because it was discussed in connection with the transfiguration, right? The power and coming. So in other words, the book of Enoch was a topic for discussion on the Mount of Transfiguration, if you're just putting two and two together, right? And then he follows that up by saying, yeah, that we also have a more sure word of prophecy, whereunto you do well that you take heed, as unto a light that shineth in a dark place. And that specific analogy is that something you don't understand until you do, right? The thing that you didn't understand was still understandable. You just didn't understand it. So if you see that as the light shining, right? What is the dark place is your understanding,
Mm-hmm.
right? And why? Because when the day dawns, it's where? It's in your heart. So it's the
Good.
understanding of the heart that arises from seeing that thing which was always there, shining in that dark place of this age.
Hmm.
And
Well,
see
he said
that
that
we have a more sure yeah,
my
but
people are
having
destroyed for a lack of knowledge. So you really do need to have this knowledge to understand some things. Like people, he said, my people are destroyed for a lack of knowledge. Like that's a really big statement. I mean, if you don't like, we need this stuff. Really, that's what he's saying.
well, it is on the level of knowledge because you can suss out all of that from what is there, and it's not something that anybody's ever really spoken of before.
Hmm.
So the idea is that if it was there all the time and nobody had spoken of it, and yet it speaks of a time when there will be things which eye has not seen, which ear has not heard, which is never entered into the heart of mind or the mind of man or whatever, the heart of man. The idea is that, well, these are things that are like that.
Yeah, but
You know,
he said in the Gospel of Thomas, he says he says like, do you understand the beginning? Because they asked him, how will the end be? And he said, do you understand the beginning that you're asking about the end? That means that even his disciples, which he could have been talking like to us technically, because it's a metaphor or whatever, but like if he's talking directly to them when he said it, he like, you got to think like he's talking to the Christians, he's talking to the elect, and he's talking to the Jews, and he's saying to them, they're asking him what's the end going to be like? Because most Christians nowadays, they're like, oh my goodness, how's the end going to be? And there's all these apocalyptic movies, but really, just go back to the beginning. Like, go back to the beginning, because he said, I'm going to tell you things that have been hidden since the beginning of time. And apocrypha means hidden. So he said, like, I mean, it goes right back to it. There's like all these times that he points to the apocrypha because it's something that has been hidden from us for so long. You know what I mean? And not it's not really been hidden though. It was available. It's just you didn't know you kind of needed it. I was in Christian school my whole life. I didn't even know the apocrypha existed. I had no idea there were extra books. I had no clue. And that technically, I mean, not technically, but it is the 66 books is like the crucified body of Christ, because it took away all these books that, I mean, when you read the super gospel and because you put 100 books together into one thing, and I know the Holy Spirit guided you along that path. I'm not saying you did it on your own, but that's an amazing thing when you read the super gospel and you see the things that Jesus did as a little kid, and you realize what he's done through history, and you realize and that knowledge, knowing that he did all that stuff, really made me respect God a lot more than I did when I was going through Christian school growing up. I thought it was a joke. I thought it was just something my parents were making me do. I didn't realize that he loved me and that all this like stuff was true. I had no idea, and putting all that stuff back in to create his full body again, it just like it really changed my life. You know what I mean? It's amazing to me that he has that power. He's smart. You know what I mean? And we didn't give him that much credit this whole time, in my opinion.
there's a lot of steps towards finding the truth. There are a lot of things you have to go through. That's part of the reason why many are called but few are chosen, right? The idea is that, and he's always, again, with the onus thing, right? Ask and you shall receive.
Mm-hmm.
Seek and you shall find. Knock and the door will be open. He's asking you to do things, right? He's gonna respond to what your effort is, what your intentions are. Are you really knocking? Are you really seeking? Right? Well, I mean, even if he's testing you, when you think about it, he's not going to make it that easy, I think, for just anyone or whatever, because on the level of the individual, you should be exercising, some degree of persistence. You should be exercising some, those are virtues, those are things that you should be gaining along the way, sort of value added, if you will, to your soul and to your eternal wealth based on your life. Because again, time is something that once something is done, it can't be undone, right?
I
So
just said that. I
even
just
if
said that the other day. Mm-hmm.
yeah, I mean, it'll never not have happened, right? And so because of that, even the little things that you do, there's a certain level of eternity. If you were to take the most insignificant day of your life, and you didn't breathe during 10 minutes of that, it would have cut off everything else. You know what I'm saying? There's nothing that's not significant, right? I mean, on some level. So, I mean, you ask yourself why this, that, and the other, or whatever. I mean, but these are big picture kind of things. And, with big picture kind of things, I mean, there's a lot of things that are going to be not knowable, in the minutia. Um, this age is a trial. But what you were talking about the end from the beginning, getting back to that, it because it's an encoding and a decoding, right? Why do you seek for the end, right? Because the people who encoded it were at the beginning, they knew what was going to happen and they wrote it down in code and in prospect so that at the end of time, when you find the end, right? Well, I mean, what you found is the beginning. You found the encoding because you were able to decode it, right?
Mm-hmm.
So the end and the beginning stuff is always just about, the first and the last or whatever. It's always about, are you catching what they're pitching? Peter talks about this. In order for you to, you have to get this more sure word of prophecy, is what he keeps saying. You have to understand that there is a more certain word here, right? There is something here that is more solid than what you're being taught. And this is just a, pulling open that door, using the key that Peter has literally against the lock that Jude is, right? In order to open up what he's saying that Enoch was a inspired by the Holy Ghost. Peter says that because if you
Mm-hmm.
understand his terms of his term of old, the world that then was or whatever, he's talking about the antediluvian world. When he says the prophets of old, he's talking about the prophets of the antediluvian world, spake as they were moved by the Holy Spirit. So he's answering that question. So the question that was being brought to Peter was, is this inspired? Is this a cleverly concocted fable? In other words, is it a pseudepigraphon? Is it uh, by the will of man? Right? Because he juxtaposes, look, it's not by the will of man, but every prophet, prophets of old spake as they were moved by the Holy Spirit. So people were saying, look, Enoch was a false writing that was just written by some man's will. Some man sat down and wrote it, right? That's what their assertion apparently was, right? And Peter countered that with the notion that this was not by the will of man, but prophets of old. In other words, prophets of antediluvian time. In other words, the book of Enoch, right? That Enoch was a holy prophet who was inspired by the Holy Spirit, is what his assertion would be if you take the world of old to mean antediluvian.
Yeah, but the Diotrephes
Yeah,
of today, the Diotrephes of today, they're running the churches, and they're the ones that are writing the footnotes and all the things that are in our current Bibles that
yeah, but
say
but
that.
they're but their power. Look, whether they're good guys or bad guys, like, so I don't lump everybody into the bad guy category. I think there's a lot of people out there who were like what you said. They just don't know. They just don't know. And I mean, you got to give them a chance to know. You got to give them a chance to see, right?
But
And that's what I'm
I'm
saying.
saying, what I'm saying though is that, like, I read to you on the last show, like, some thing I had on my from like a Harvard book that was like a documentary or something about like these books that we're talking about. And the guy said in the 19th century that he knew that Enoch was a valid book, but we don't accept. He literally said it in the thing that we just don't accept it. So, in my opinion, we must be in the time of the coming of our Lord Jesus Christ, because that same thing isn't really spoken as much anymore. People are accepting Enoch. You can buy it on Amazon. I mean, that's, you know what I mean? Like, it's more available. So for the people that are knocking and are seeking and want to know this info, it is more readily available now. And so if it's out there now and you can buy it, there's got to be more people that are doing what we're doing and sharing it and teaching it and preaching it. You know what I
Well,
mean? So
somebody out there has skills. Somebody out there can do a short presentation. Put it out on video, 1 or 2, 3 minutes or whatever. They can summarize all of this stuff in a great way that'll catch people's attention. Maybe it'll go viral. You know, he
yeah,
just
but
tells us to put our hand to the plow. He just tells us to,
I'm not trying to be negative or anything like that. It's just that most of the stuff that I see that's out there right now is like people doing, like, the big production of like giants and stuff like that. And then they throw Enoch. Oh, we know about this because Enoch said so, but they don't talk about any of the actual, like the deep, meaningful, the meat of the word that Enoch provides. They're just doing it so that they can get like more views on their YouTube videos because it has like big pictures of scary giants and stuff like that. That's not what we're talking about. We're talking about like one of the two witnesses and like the fact that Peter and Jude were defending it and like this is like spiritual stuff. Now, I'm not talking, you know what I mean? Like I wish that there's more people that had that power to do that type of production and they're talking about what we're talking about, not like trying to get more views on so they get like more money from YouTube type stuff. You understand what I'm saying? Like people that actually spiritually care about this, like they love it. You know what I mean? Not like
Yeah,
just doing it for whatever reason.
but I'm not talking about being sensational. I'm talking about the bare bones facts of like the argument that we're talking about here now. You
Yeah,
know,
yeah, no. I'm
look,
just saying I wish more people were doing that had that kind of skill to make that type of video were helping us, is what I'm saying. Like that, but I don't see that, is what I'm saying. Like I wish they got off the like I want to make money train and got like the type of Christians, the type of Christians that were around when Jesus was first around and all the disciples were sharing all their stuff and none of them had any money because they gave it all away. They sold all their stuff and they lived in a camp with Jesus and the disciples, that type of stuff. Like being poor and who cares if I'm poor because I just want to help this situation. You know what I'm saying? That type of attitude. I just don't see that right now. That's all I'm hoping for. And maybe we could talk about something else. I'm just making a statement.
well, I mean, this was all going to unfold, but like I was mentioning before, he talks about we can speed his coming. Sort of implicit in that is that we will do that by means of the tools that he's given us. We
Mm-hmm.
want to be able to illustrate, what the fundamental message is here. The fundamental message here is to think outside the box. Look, they've got you constrained by this thing called the canon. If we could dispense with that, we can literally throw their particular baby out with that particular bathwater because at that point all bets are off.
I can see it. That's like a picture I did of like Jesus on the cross and like all the books are being like ripped off of him, like Enoch, Elijah. I mean, not Enoch, Jubilees, all these other books. I don't know if you
Yeah,
can see it.
I think I remember that. You sent me once either that one or one that was like that one.
I didn't finish it. I get these tangents where I start working on something and I go into something else. Sorry, go ahead.
Well, but like what I'm saying is just in specific, those two books, right, within the canon, right, have if you just affirm them, they're affirming this book. See, those are the ways in which you can argue your way into the how should I say it? You can bring yourself into, if you will, the argument, because the idea is that when Jesus tells us that he's going to give us a mouth and a wisdom that no one will be able to not deny or to gainsay, right? And then you're able to articulate things that actually undercut things as fundamental as the canon, things as fundamental as everything the church has ever taught. That the axe, if you will, is laid at that particular root of that particular tree. And you can articulate it and you can actually wave that axe around, if you will, and chop that tree down, basically based on the fact that you're given this axe to do it with, right? The idea is that Christianity and Judaism, as it's been taught, are undercut by all of this completely. The book of the Gospel of Thomas talks in a couple of ways about this. Let him that hath power renounce it. The idea is that the people who are in power now, that they are going to lose their credibility. And if they stay on the wrong side of the truth, in other words, there's going to be this line of demarcation. But the idea is that as this realization grows, and that's the thing I keep trying to underscore, it's not just a belief, it's a realization. It's a recognition that, if you just go this other way with it, it yields this whole other line of thinking. Like, people weren't talking so much about what was happening with the apostles. Like, why were they being marginalized, right? You read in Third John about Diotrephes, we just now spoke about, right? John said he wrote a letter that Diotrephes wouldn't let it be read, right? That he couldn't go to the church, right? That Diotrephes, who loves to have the preeminence, he prates against him, right? And he won't let any of his disciples into his church or whatever. So why is John being marginalized, right? Why is Jude being questioned, right? I mean, clearly bringing this letter to Peter with these questions as to the authenticity of Enoch and the veracity of Jude by extension, right? The idea is that why would these things be in the first place? Why is he even having to address all of these issues, right?
Because
About
Revelation 2:9 and 3:9 says those who say they are Jews but they're not, they're the synagogue of Satan, were not only ruling the world right now, but they were ruling the world back then. The ones that Joshua led into the land by mistake, and they became the Levitical priesthood. And then Annas and Caiaphas were the high priests at that time instead of John the Baptist, who was supposed to be in that place. And like, statistically, like his family and like Mary and Joseph both came from David's line. So that means that that means Jesus would have been king, basically. Like that he was our king. And then right before he died, they made him the high priest, Jesus the high priest too, because Mary gave a testimony of who he was. Like literally the same people that are ruining the world right now are the people that were ruining it back then. The Romans and the false Jews. Jesus said they're the false Jews and they're the synagogue of Satan. I'm not picking on a certain group of people. It's just what Jesus said. I don't care. Like, I just go by what the word says. He said it in Revelation that they're fake Jews. They're not even the real ones. So if Jesus said it, they're the ones who crucified him in the first place. And they're running around picking on all the disciples saying, oh, none of that stuff's true. No, Enoch wasn't a prophet. Like, I'm sure Diotrephes was friends with them all. If they're the ones that had the power back then, and then all of a sudden Diotrephes is taking over John's church and putting him on Patmos, it's the same way things are today. The same people do the same stuff today. Everybody does that. I mean, even they pulled over Mel Gibson. They gave him crap because he made Passion of the Christ and put the blame on the Jews in that movie too. That's the way it is. It's just the way it is.
Well, the thing about it was that if you understand the milieu at the time, like in the Dead Sea Scrolls, we have the Dead Sea Scrolls community, for example, they didn't have the same concept of the canon that the establishment Jews had, the scribes and the Pharisees and the Sadducees. Although there were variations among their canons or whatever, they were still a more limited scope than they had among the Essenes. Clearly, with the Essenes, there was this notion that what the establishment said was wrong, that they were run by corrupt people, and that their ideas didn't entail, for example, the Book of Enoch, which is something they read, the Book of Giants, which is something they read, the Book of Sirach,
Sirach.
was
Mm-hmm.
something they read. A lot of things that they read weren't read by the scribes and the Sadducees, and the whatever. They were outside of that particular religious paradigm. Okay. So when you say the synagogue of Satan, you have to recognize that, Judaism is one thing, the way that it was intended to be versus the way that the establishment runs it and controls
Well,
it.
Barnabas said that as far back as Moses' time, that the way that they currently think that the food laws are was taught to them by an evil angel because it wasn't supposed to be a carnally thought thing. It was supposed to be a spiritual maxim because all the food laws, like pigs are false Christians, dogs are false Jews. Like it's all a code. It's not even the way that they thought it was supposed to be. Like when you give like grain to like an animal, like that when it's talking about the animal with the split hoof, like a deer or something, it's talking about the fact that like when you give, like for instance, let's picture us as the deer, because we're different kinds of people. A Christian that loves Jesus and he gives you food and you say thank you Jesus for this food, and it's like his word that you're thanking him for because he gave you, like when I got the apocrypha and all these extra books, I was like thank you Jesus for all this information. So he's feeding me the food and I'm eating it and I'm saying thank you. That's what like a deer would do because that's an animal with a split hoof. But all these creatures that are like bottom feeders, like shrimp and all that stuff, which people say, oh, you shouldn't eat shrimp because it's a bottom dweller and it's eating bacteria. That's not even what it's talking about. It's talking about all these creatures that are bottom dwellers in the water, the dark water, and they never come to the surface, which is the knowledge that we're talking about right now. These are spiritual maxims that David knew, Moses knew, but an evil angel taught it to the people the wrong way. And that's taught, you can read that in the Epistle of Barnabas. So this goes way back. You know what I mean? This goes way back to the beginning of when Judaism started. You know what I mean? According to Barnabas, who studied with Paul, and Paul was like one of the top scholars of Judaism that converted to Christianity, which, only happened because Stephen prayed for him.
Well, right.
Sorry, that was a
But
tangent.
here's the
You don't have to
but
address it. I was just tangenting.
well well, I mean it's sort of tangentially related. The idea is that because they're the carnal mind and the spiritual mind are being sort of contrasted. And that's the idea is there's a way that seems right to a man, but the ends thereof are the ways of death. And as Thomas explains to us, whoever comes to understand these things will not taste of death. So the tasting of death is a function of your not understanding. So knowledge is a way of bringing things alive to you because now they're not things that you guess at. They're not things that you suppose are true or that you believe because somebody told you or taught you. It's because you have eyes to see, because you have ears to hear, and it's a spiritual intuition. And so it awakens a spiritual dimension in you because again we were talking about the eternal nature of the word and the timelessness involved and the when Peter talks about the people who forget that they were cleansed of their past sins or whatever and they cannot see afar off, it means that they don't understand the beginning so as to understand the end, because afar off has to do with the endings, right? The people who knew the original mystery are writing it down and encoding it, and that includes Peter, that includes Jude, right? That
It
includes
says,
John.
Peter chapter 2, verse 7, they trip because they refuse to believe the word. This is the fate appointed for them.
Well,
But you, sorry, go ahead.
and also Peter talks about not it is a refusal because he talks about it would be better for them not to have known the way of righteousness. So they had knowledge of the way of righteousness, right? But they turned their backs on it, right?
They
Again,
rejected the cornerstone, it
to
says.
follow the error of the lamb, right? To
Yep.
for the lust of this world, for the the pride, the pleasure, the desires, the whatever of lust, right? So they deliberately took the knowledge, like we were talking about earlier. Like, if you can imagine a scenario, because it speaks about this in the book of Revelation, it talks about how they were given power to overcome the saints, right? So you have the two earliest churches, right? The church of the Ephesians and the church of the Smyrnians, right? Who were basically more or less coexisted, and they sort of represent the church that forgot the central mystery. They lost their first love, in other words,
Yep.
um, and then there were those who died for it, which were like like it says to the church of the Smyrnians, right? um you know hold on to what you have to the death, right? And I'll give you a crown of life, right? So the idea is that they were killed off. But if there was this knowledge and they were turning their back on this knowledge knowingly, willingly, deliberately, right? In order to subvert it,
It's
right?
blasphemy of the Holy
If
Spirit.
that was, yeah, blasphemy of the Holy Spirit, the crucifying the Lord again, right? Um, by eating the
I
food
just talked about
sacrificed,
this.
they're
The the comedian Sarah Silverman, I don't know if you know who she is. She said on live on stage that if Jesus comes back to crucify him again, she said live what you just said that they exactly that's what blasphemy of the Holy Spirit is. Just sickening, just sickening.
yeah, I guess the thing about it is, I don't know that she knows what we're saying. I don't know that she knows any of that.
Yeah,
Um,
yeah.
they're at the very best, at the very least, it's just somebody trying to do say something for shock value.
Right,
That's
right,
but
right.
that's bare minimum, but there's probably something more sinister there. That's something that's very common in that world, in that realm. But that's sort of a little bit, I mean, beyond the scope of what we're saying. I understand there's people who are going to blaspheme the Holy Spirit. These people who were back then, like you talk about Diotrephes, who love to have the preeminence, right? If you just sort of turn over in your mind, here you have John, who wrote the book of Revelation, first, second, and third John, right? The Gospel of John was the one that Jesus loved. He put his head on Jesus's chest, right? And then you got Diotrephes. You know what I'm saying? And I don't care. I don't care what kind of rhetorician he might have been. I don't care what kind of schooling he might have had. I don't care what kind of IQ this guy might have had or whatever.
No
I
excuse for
mean,
it.
there's not the cred there that John has, right? And yet
Right,
here
right.
he is keeping him out of the church
Well,
and
not only
praying
that,
against
John
him.
was the only disciple that was at the cross. Everybody else bailed. He was the only one that was at the cross watching the crucifixion, and he only left at the last second because he couldn't stand to watch it. And he was there with Mary, like watching it happen. So he went in the
You know,
cave or whatever.
I mean, I just, every time I read that, it just blows my mind. Like, how could you? But part of me, like a younger version of myself, a more idealistic, kind of a noob version of myself, I think I might have questioned whether human beings were really that disloyal or that malleable.
Mhm.
Because I think I grew up in a time where, you know, I to me, some of the things that were unthinkable then are just an inevitable reality that I'm just faced with on a day-to-day basis. And I can't imagine how we went from where we were to where we are sometimes. I look at it, but if you look at it in another way, it is very lockstep. It does make sense. If you go back far enough, you can see that if there were not some evil plan afoot, it is very much as if there were some evil plan afoot, right? I think
Yeah.
everybody could admit that at least the appearance of an evil plan that was afoot could be detailed and outlined in our history, because there seems to be this degradation that we've
Are you talking
gone
about like? Are
from.
you talking about like Illuminati Masonic type crap? Is that what you're talking about?
Well, I mean, included in that, yeah. But I mean, I'm
Or
just
I
talking
just, I
about it.
just,
I'm just talking about evil in
yeah.
general. The way
Oh,
that,
you don't talk about it that much. So I was just saying, is that what you're talking about? Like, so I was just curious. Like,
well,
because
I
you
mean,
talked
sometimes.
one time you mentioned like the evil eye type thing or whatever, but I was just curious if that's your mention.
Well, it's a many pronged battle, and I sometimes don't like to particularize this because
Yeah, yeah, I know. I was just
to
curious.
say this is almost to say it's not that, and it's a lot of things,
Yeah, I
and I
know.
don't like
There's
to
a
pick
thousand
on.
different. It's like a multi-headed. Like what's that thing called? The Hydra. It's like a multi-headed snake. It's not or whatever. Like it's not just one thing. It's multiple evil things that if you cut one head off, another grows back in its place, basically.
Yeah, I'm not saying you got to pick your battles. I'm just saying they're all battles, and that's the
Yeah,
thing.
I know him.
Comes down to it. There, you got to look at all of the different battles that can be fought and which ones actually bring you success. See, this particular argument, if you want to call it that, the things that I'm trying to point out here, again,
Mhm.
about the mechanism for the bringing back of the Book of Enoch, it's all on an objective basis. Like if you're not a Christian and you don't believe any of those things, but you can sit down with the book in front of you and have at least enough objectivity to say, look, this is his assertion, this is what he says. Then if you could at least make that, then all of these things that we're trying to point out, these are points that follow logically based on their argument, that I think once you see them, you can see the intentionality. And because there is that intentionality, and because right here at the end we have the actual outcome that is spoken of, we have apparently where we were able to arrive at the same faith as they had from the beginning, because we're seeing what they're affirming and we're affirming what they're saying, whereas other people were not seeing what they were affirming and were not affirming what they were saying. It's a different approach. And so when you see that there were all of these mechanisms, there's all these questions about the propriety of using these books. If they had believed Jude, they wouldn't have gone to Peter, with all of these questions. Is
Mhm.
this a cleverly concocted fable, right? Were prophets of antediluvian times really inspired by the Holy Spirit or not, right? So Peter makes it so that you can figure it out. He doesn't
Yeah,
say it
but
so
when
you.
when you think of fable though, when you think of fables, like I do, when I think of fables, I think of like nursery rhyme stuff. You know what I mean? Like things that don't make sense. You know what I mean? Like things that are not in our normal world, things we don't experience every day. So if they say fable, it brings my mind to giants, and it brings my mind to fallen angels.
Well,
And
fables
so
are
you know what I mean? Like things are stories that are so unbelievable that you ask yourself, could this be true? So if they like ask yourself, oh, could this possibly be true? Because in the time of Israel, they didn't necessarily have like during this time in Israel, they didn't have giants around really anymore per se. You know what I mean? So they're asking them like, is Enoch valid? Because it talks about fallen angels and giants. Because if they're asking that question back then, that's what people are asking right now too. Like we don't have that stuff right now, but it's everybody's talking about it. It's everywhere. It's like the giant of Kandahar they saw and the soldiers saw in Afghanistan. I mean, it's like there's real stories of it happening now. You know what I mean? So I don't know. They must have been asking that type of stuff. Like, what is this a fable or not? You know, because Enoch has a lot of stuff in it that does not seem normal. Like, for instance, the book of Tobit, which is in the Apocrypha, the angel Raphael comes down and helps Tobias go on a journey to defeat a demon. That's not a normal. That's like a fable type story. You know what I mean? It's like like a nursery rhyme type thing. You know what I mean? It doesn't seem like a normal everyday. Like if you look in the canon, there's only two mentions really of like two angels, you know, like Gabriel and Michael. There's really no other angels. But if you go to Enoch, there's all different angels. There's third Enoch has all like hundreds of different angels in that book. You know what I mean? So if they had access to third Enoch back then, they might have been asking him, is this true? Is this how it really is? Because if you read um third Enoch, it's the whole thing is narrated by a guy named Rabbi Ishmael or something like that. So they're like who went to heaven and saw this stuff. So they're like asking him, hey, like did you like you gotta imagine now, hey, are these angels, is this where we really get our crowns from? Is this really what God's chariot is like? Does he really have all these different levels of angels up there, and is that what his throne, you know, and whatever they might have been asking. I'm just hypothesizing, but if they went to Jude with that kind of info and Jude's like, yeah, it's true. Yeah, that's what it says. And then they're like, no, I don't believe that. I'm going to go to somebody more credible. So they go to Peter, and Peter doesn't necessarily answer it, because if he straight out answered it, it wouldn't allow us to have this more sure word now, because we have history in the hindsight, like the alpha omega thing you're talking about. You know what I mean? I'm just talking,
yeah, that's right.
chime in, whatever.
Yeah, again, because it's encoded to be
Right,
decoded, right? Same as
right,
anything else. The end is at the beginning.
right.
This is just pointing that out
This is a
because
candle. This is a candle from one of my listeners, B. Eden. It just happens to say, when his branch is yet tender, ye know that summer is nigh. It's the fig tree. That's the name of this candle. Matthew 24:32. So me and you talk about that all the time, that this is the time for the leaves or whatever. You remember, were you talking about that? Like this is where like the elect come forth in this time. Enoch prophesied that that would happen, that we would be talking about this kind of stuff at this time.
yeah, the summer, of course, Philip brings up in the Gospel of Philip that the winter is this world in symbolic terms, and summer is the world to come. So when you see the leaves come forth, you know that the world to come is upon us, and
Right.
it speaks to that too, the New Jerusalem that comes down out of heaven. Well, again, we because we through our disbelief have had the heavens, if you will, the heavenly understanding shut up to us, right? But it's been there all the time. It's been there available to us the whole time, which kind of goes to show how eager he was to give it to us, and yet at the same time, how our eyes were being held. It's a spiritual thing, right? The fact that we're here on that day, and that the Bible is opening up to us, like a door, a place before you, an open door, and no man can shut it, right? So the cat's out of the bag. It really is just a matter of time. What I was going to point out was, again, like it says here, the understanding of this. If you really get it, if you really understand it, then I'm urging people who understand this to spread the word. I mean, you can share videos, that's fine. You can always do that. But I'm just talking about put your hand to the plow, because again, it talks about speeding his coming. These are very direct arguments that, like, you could talk about all kinds of things. You could talk about cosmological matters. You could talk about books that you've read that other people haven't read and stuff like that. But the problem with that particular approach, and the reason why it's less effective, let's say, is because a person can arbitrarily believe or disbelieve anything. A person could arbitrarily believe or disbelieve the Bible. A person could arbitrarily believe or disbelieve the Quran. People can arbitrarily believe or disbelieve anything. This is why the idea of belief is always a little bit puzzling, because, I don't think that faith is the same thing as belief. I think faith is like, when you read Jude and you believe that he's telling you that Enoch is ancient, and you believe that he's telling you that he's, that he's a prophet, and you believe that, that's being faithful to his word. And so when you apply that faith, you know what I'm saying, to the word, and you give the prophet the benefit of the doubt, and you try to see what the prophet is actually telling you versus what men are telling you, because again, let God be true and every man a liar. That shifts the paradigm away from anybody's teaching and to direct perception, right? And so if it should happen to be that this leads to direct perception, because remember, this is a point I keep trying to get to, is that he extends this beyond himself too. He says, look, even as Paul wrote to you, according to the wisdom that God gave him. So stop and think about it. If you understand the wisdom that was given to Peter, right, in order to bind on earth, to bind in heaven which was bound on earth, right, to bind it, and also the power to loose it, right? By what? By way of remembrance, right? So this is an effective demonstration of his power. So that is written according to the wisdom that was given to him by God, right? To encode it in such a way that it could be decoded, right? So when he says that Paul writes in such a way, right, in a similar way, which is hard to be understood, in which people twist to their own destruction, you can see how they twisted Second Peter and Jude to their own destruction. And he extends that to Paul. He says Paul talks in his books about these very same things. And so you see how there's a road here. You see how there's an entrance here. There's like you bring up the point about Enoch. He says that he's not for his age, but for an age to come. Okay. And you see how Jude picks up the mantle, so to speak. And he talks about it in connection with his coming, again, to remove the wicked and the ungodly, just as if to underscore that's exactly what he's intending to do. See, once you see it, you see it. And then people had questions as to the propriety. Jude, you said this was coming from an apostle, right? You're saying that this is ancient. You're saying this is prophetic. We think that this is a cleverly concocted fable. We think that those people who wrote back then, or they weren't they just wrote according to the will of man, and were not inspired by the Holy Spirit. So Peter gets this book back to him. Did you apostles really send him to say this? Yes, we did. He affirms
Mhm.
that, right?
Yeah, but
Is this book a
people speak evil of dignities, and you mentioned it in your video this morning I was listening to, that people speak evil of dignities. And so if Peter is saying this thing and Jude is saying this thing, and then also the Paul who was sent to preach to the Gentiles, which is us, is saying this same thing, and Peter says that he's saying the same thing, and Peter is affirming that Paul is a true and righteous man who was changed by God and knew all this stuff, because it says what you just said, 2 Peter 3:15, bear in mind that our Lord's patience is an opportunity for salvation, as Paul, our dear friend and brother, said when he wrote to you, with the wisdom God gave him. So God gave him wisdom, and they all share that same wisdom. And like you mentioned, they had the same scribe, Sylvanus. So they were all writing these things probably together around the same time. And it's possible that the datings that the same evil people that are running the churches right now probably dated it incorrectly, as they've lied about the fact that Enoch is, a righteous scribe who wrote 365 books of wisdom. You know what I mean? So it's just everything that they are currently saying, in my opinion, about all this stuff is a lie, and they've been perpetuating that lie for 2,000 years, and that was allowed by God because he gave 2,000 years over to the pigs, the false Christians. And now that time is over. And we are in the Sabbath. We're in the seventh millennia. We're in that time where God said, don't sin. And we shouldn't be sinning. We should be speeding his coming so that we can allow people to know this. And I agree with you. The utmost important thing is this knowledge. The utmost important thing is this key and this lock, because it's a simple mechanism. It can be taught fairly quickly, and it opens the eyes of everyone, the Muslim, the atheist, the Christian that doesn't know it yet, all of them at once. You could preach this to anybody that believes any different thing, and they would understand it because it's a simple thing. And all you have to do is have the mind of a child, be open to it. You know what I mean? And it comes alive, honestly. So go ahead.
Well, see, but that's just exactly the point. See, it's what it was always meant to do. It was meant to change us to become a different kind of person, not the kind of person who uh gets knowledge secondhand from people or from men, but from the scriptures themselves, through believing, what I'm saying. Just it's like the key that unlocks everything, because again, he draws the line from Enoch to Jude. He's saying he's not a cleverly concocted fable, right? Yes, we the apostles did teach this stuff, so he's sticking up for Jude, right? Then he says Paul teaches this stuff, right? And they mess up Paul too, right? Just like they're going to mess me up, right? That's why I've got to make it so that I will make every effort to make sure you'll be able to remember this, because they're going to screw what I'm saying up too, right?
And that's
Notice
the
how they
reason
don't they
that's the
don't have
reason Paul was a prisoner. Paul was a metaphoric prisoner. The entire, like, Paul was a prisoner in all of his books, basically, but he was also a prisoner for these 2,000 years because nobody understood what he was really talking about. Like, it's a metaphor, but it's a real living metaphor, just like all the apostles and disciples were
Yeah,
themselves.
because the scripture. See, the thing about it is that things can be locked up on the earth, right? Or they can be loosed, right? So understanding something loosens it. You've unleashed a mystery. It's like seeing through an illusion. It's no longer an illusion once you see it. So once you recognize something is there, you can't unsee it, right? So you have that knowledge. So likely, if you've internalized anything of what's been said, I mean, you out there listening, right? Something about that book has changed for you. Something about the way you read that book should have changed for you in such a way as to understand and see the hand of eternity on it, right? And once you recognize the hand of eternity, because you can actually see it and have knowledge of it, and are able to articulate it, right? Then you know that that's the time when the elect or whatever are to be unleashed and to be unbounded. Remember the metaphor. See, the whole idea of the dissensus works on the metaphorical level too, because again, we talked about the light shining in the dark place until the day dawns and the morning star rises in your hearts, right? So in other words, what is this dark place? It lasts until the day dawns and the morning star rises in our hearts. So it's a metaphorical space, right? It is the time up into the time of revelation, right? Until the time that the light shines in our hearts, and that is the day, right? When the day dawns. So the early part of the Sabbath millennium, which is the seventh. So that's when the day dawns, is early, right? So early here in the seventh millennium, the day dawns in our hearts, right? And we are given the morning star, which Yeshua tells us in Revelation. Of course, he is the bright and morning star.
But yeah, and you mentioned in that I forget what the name of the video is. I'll find it later. But you mentioned also that this great harvest that is taken in at the 11th hour. Like, it's very late. It's very late before Christ comes that so many people are going to find this information out. But like you said, once it catches on, it's going to catch on like wildfire, and then we have a job to do. And remember, it says something in the canon, I forget where, but like it says like there'll be like 1,000 grapes on every cluster, and each one will say, "Come, take me, I'm better," or something like that. Almost like to say that that harvest, that 11th hour harvest, is like there's going to be so many people that get this at the same time that it's like you can't even, like, there's so many people around you, like you just like there's so many people that want to know this, that like you can't grab them fast enough. You know what I mean? There's just going to be so many people that want to get this at the very end, right before Jesus comes, that there will be. And it says, pray that there be more people, more harvesters. Pray that there be more people to go and harvest this great thing. You know what I mean? Like that's what I take from the Bible when I read that kind of stuff. Like there's this thing coming that we have to be ready for, to bring in the all these people that are going to be ready to accept this at the end.
Well, again, with an army of people, 10,000s of the saints, right?
Right.
That are going to have spiritual eyes to see and spiritual ears to hear, like we talked about with the dew, how it magnifies things. If you're able to look at something and get way more meaning out of it than you otherwise could have by means of the word, which is what the dew is, right? Then you get this sense of just how much information, you're just blowing up this little piece right here, and then there's another piece over there to blow up, and a chapter over there's another little piece to blow up, and in another book there's another piece to that puzzle, and in another book there's another piece to that puzzle, and it
Right.
all just sort of fits together. You see, it's the big fish as opposed to all the little fish, right? You throw the
Right.
little
Right.
fish back into the age, you throw them back into the sea. There was no
Yeah,
more
but
sea, there was no
I
more
think I
rain.
told you that when I think I told you that when I had prophetic dreams for like a long time after my house burnt down, and right when I found your work, right when I found it, you didn't teach me this yet about the fishes, the 153 or whatever fishes, and like the large fish that was kept and all that stuff. I didn't read that in the super gospel yet, but I had a dream that there was two Native American people standing across a river from me, and they were smiling the biggest smiles I've ever seen, like so big of smiles. And I knew they weren't alive; they were spirits, and they were happy because they were in heaven. But they were here talking to me on Earth, and they were across this river, and they passed me the biggest fish I've ever seen in my whole life. It was so big, and I don't know how they were holding it, but there was cash like on the ground right next to me, and it was meaningless to me. And at the time, I only really cared about worldly things, so I think the cash represented the worldly things to me. But that fish, that one big fish, was so. I knew that's all I wanted in this world, and I had just found the super gospel, and ever since then, I like literally for like 4 years of my sales job just on the road, all I did all day was listen to the super gospel all day long. It's burned into my head. And like just listening to your work all the time in the car, I literally memorized Jude. When you say it, I'm saying it with you in my mind. I know it by heart. And that's difficult for me because I went to all Christian school in my senior year. I almost failed out of school because I couldn't remember memory verses very well. I couldn't remember scripture verses very well. And now it's like this because I know what it means and I know how it pertains to our lives. And it's something I want to know. You know what I mean? It's like I have to eat it, spiritually eat it. It's like in my brain. I can't get rid of it. Sorry, go ahead.
No, that's okay. Well, I mean that's part of the thing is that the way that the super gospel started out is just part of my own personal study, which is what all of this stuff really was. Like even all the books that I read, this was way before the internet. This was way before YouTube. I was just reading into a tape recorder because I felt like my thought was there was all this stuff to read, and I thought I'd be doing myself a favor if I read it sort of like with understanding, right? Even if I didn't quite understand it at the moment I was reading it, because I'm reading it for the first time, and it's not all quite sunk in yet, that if I were to listen to it and it was a little bit dramatized and it was a little bit, it would be more real to me, and it would be more alive to me. And when I was looking at whether these books or whatever they lined up or something, I was taking and I was doing the cut and paste, and I was just sort of manually making copies and lining up columns and moving things together and seeing if it was worth all the trouble, whether it was going to line up or not. So it's like counting the cost, looking at whether this was really happening or not.
Yeah, but
And the thing was,
I wanted to ask you something though. Where did you ever even find the infancy gospel? Because like I never even knew the infancy gospel existed, and like there's so you can answer this question. That's all I want to know is like where you found it. But like, there's so many things in the infancy gospel that like I feel like some of that stuff would just bring people to Christ in like 5 seconds if they knew that stuff. Like lions come out of the cave and like bow before Jesus when he's a little kid. Like Jesus meets Titus and Dumachus, the two people that are on the cross before he ever like even was with them on the cross. They met him when he was 3, and they say the good thief saved his life because he gave 40 goats in his belt to the other thief so they wouldn't tell on Mary and Joseph for being there or whatever. I mean, the idols fell at Jesus's feet when he came into Egypt. Jesus healed the people, that woman from witchcraft. Jesus healed the person that turned into a donkey. Like there's thousands and thousands of miracles in that book alone. Never mind the ones we don't even know about. So I mean, it's like that changed my life. You know how many times I cried listening to that because I never knew it growing up in Christian school, and I knew there was more to the story. I felt it. It's just I never heard it, and when I heard it, I was like, I can't let this go. I can never let this go. He's real. You know what I mean? So I just curious where you found it.
Well, I feel like what you have is in your heart. You've got a place where, these things have their effect on you. I think not everybody has that particular attitude when they look at these books. I have to remember that people are looking at things from a certain scholarly level, like what we were just talking about just now. If you can derive the questions from Peter's answers, for example, the idea is that their assessment of Enoch was that it was a book written by the will of man, right? That was a cleverly concocted fable. And I can imagine somebody having a certain maybe appeal, uh, in the early church arguing that way. I mean, let's say that you're an intellectual or you want to come across as being smart or whatever. Because again, John, he was a fisherman, right? Peter, he was a fisherman, right?
Right.
People believe them based on their proximity to Jesus and also the fact that they were handpicked by
Mm-hmm.
Jesus and well endorsed and also could do miracles and stuff like that. But I mean, who knows if they were, maybe as articulate or as well spoken, perhaps as Diotrephes, right? People have ways of being charismatic or convincing that, maybe he was gifted in a way, maybe, but I think what it boils down to is that there was going to be this falling away, that was inevitable, and then it's for a benevolent reason. Like he says that, don't take it as slackness, right? But the Lord is patient, not willing that any, should be lost. You think about people like you, people like me. If this had happened 2,000 years ago, there wouldn't have been room for us. You know
Mm-hmm.
what I'm saying? And he has many mansions, if you will, to fill up, with us. And, he's got many books to write of our lives, and he's written us into the fabric of space and time and into his story. And see, that's the other thing too. This is the reassuring thing is once you realize again, you see him as in control of time and space, because again, he's called the end from the beginning. And therefore, when you recognize the encoding and you see the decoding, you see the actual timelessness of what he said, because he was able to control time in such a way as to pull this off. Because by the time he's pulled this off, everything has played itself out just
Yeah.
exactly as foretold. So you have the thing in prospect and you have it in retrospect, and therefore you have it in completion. And so you recognize that the all is not deficient. That the people who don't recognize the whole big picture is because of their own deficiency. The light is shining, but their hearts are their hearts and their minds, because they don't have minds to understand, they don't have hearts to understand, they don't have eyes to see and ears to hear just yet, because it hasn't been given to them. Like again, if the walk from Emmaus was a metaphor for the age, right? Well, their eyes were being held.
Yep.
So we are being, if our hearts are burning within us, let's say, hearing about the scriptures or whatever, but again, our eyes are being held along the way, right?
Mm-hmm.
Until such a time as he wants to reveal it. But again, with this recognition comes a sense of timelessness. And so because you realize that for sure, you live in a world where there is a God who has this kind of power, right? Now there's no fear of death. There's no fear of anything, because you know that the one who brought you to this point has power over time and space and did know about you from the beginning. All of us, right? He did go and prepare a place for us, right? And now he's coming back to get us. You
Yeah.
see what I'm saying? You recognize that. This is a delivery mechanism out from the jaws of religion, which has tried to encapsulate you with this canon or other, this teaching or other, right? And all of these things are imposed from the outside in, and they're false. And so all of these false um Christianities, right? The little fish, right? They just get tossed back into the sea, and the sea disappears because, again, they're in heaven again. There's a place where there is no more sea. That's you're passing into the seventh millennium, out of the age of man, right? And so all the nations and peoples and tongues and kings, or whatever that were then or whatever, are now a thing of the past, right? He's talking about transformation, and the flesh putting on the spirit, and us being changed. And that's what this does, is it opens up that door that he talks about in the church of the Philadelphians. Behold, I have placed before you an open door, and no man can shut it, because you have had a little strength, right? And have kept my word, right? And again, you see how little strength it actually takes, right? I mean, you can almost say it in a very nonchalant kind of way. Jude says he's a prophet. Peter says that this is not some cunningly devised fable. Where do you get off saying that it is?
Yeah.
It's not really rocket science. It's very simple. It's just like I was saying before about one and one. When did it start? When will it end? You can understand eternity on a very simple level, right? Because you can understand timelessness by that. Just that tiny little understanding, a child can understand timelessness just by that one little analogy. It's just that human beings are wired in such a way that they're not seeing what is obviously there, because they're bombarded with confusion. And I think some of this is on a spiritual level. I think that some of this is scrambling of the spirit. I think some of this is wicked arts. These are demonic powers and demonic entities, and I don't want to speak any power to these things, but this is just to show you that once you snap out of it, Jesus says, look, when they shake off their wine, then they will repent. Because drunkenness is the same thing as confusion, is the same thing as blindness, is the same thing as death, is the same thing as poverty. It's all about looking down instead of looking up. It's all about having the lower vision instead of the inner vision, to understand what is there before you. And when you recognize what is before your face, then what is hidden to you would become revealed to you, right? Well, what is before our face? It is manifestly the case that this was the scenario. The letter was brought to Peter. The Peter defended it, and he defended Jude. He took that meaning and he extended it to Paul and to the other scriptures, right? So, in other words, he did a full job in unlocking everything by saying that what he said in that letter applied to everything else. You see, so he did a thorough job in just what Jesus gave him, the title of, by saying, behold, he says that that I shall give you the keys of the kingdom, right? And you see, this is an interesting thing too. One of the keys that you see in Paul, right, is his usage, and you see this in actually in Peter as well. He mentions Christ Jesus in Peter too, but um, but the idea that there's a syntax, there's a distinction between the two aspects of Yeshua, or Jesus. There is Jesus, the man, and then, of course, what you see on the Mount of Transfiguration, right, which is the Christ. And so when they're on their way through to the Decapolis, I guess, and the question is asked, or no, I'm sorry, it was Caesarea Philippi. Sorry,
Mhm.
the question is asked, uh, who do men say that I am? And they give them all kinds of answers, like some say Jeremiah or one of the other prophets or whatever. And then the question is asked, and Peter specifically answers, well, thou art the Christ, the Son of the living God, right? And Jesus says to him, blessed art thou, Simon Barjona, For flesh and blood has not revealed this to you, but my Father which is in heaven, right? And I say that thou art Peter, and upon this rock I will build my church, and I will give you the keys of the kingdom, and what you bind on earth shall be bound in heaven, and what you loose on earth shall be loosed in heaven, right? So that fulfills Peter's function, right? So what is the difference between his lower and his higher self? Well, there's the name given him at his circumcision is Jesus. And also in Revelation, the name Jesus, he says, is the spirit of prophecy. So it's all in prospect. So Jesus is his fleshly name, and Christ is the name that is not given by men, but that which is given by the Father, or not given by flesh and blood. So the flesh level, the blood level, is contrasted with the heavenly level of the Father, right? Which is the hidden thing. Because again, it was my Father in heaven that revealed this to you, right? Not the flesh and blood like here on earth. So when he says things like, for example, the man, um, Christ Jesus, right? He's being very specific because Christ represents his eternal nature. And so if his eternal nature is followed by his temporal manifestation, which is Jesus, to see that's Christ Jesus. That's going from the higher level, right? The Christ level. My Father in heaven has not revealed this to you, that he is the Christ, in other words, or my Father has revealed this to you, but flesh and blood is not, right? So that which is revealed to you by the Father is the Christ, right? The that particular aspect of him anyway.
Mhm.
And
Hold
the
on one sec.
fleshly aspect.
This is this is Hades and Satan saying the same thing. Is he really so powerful? Hades challenged Prince Satan that he does all this with his word alone. If he fears death so much, then who must he be to have such authority? Will you indeed be able to hold your own against him if he has this kind of clout? Look, through your might you have brought down and subjected great people to my rule. So if you have this kind of authority and he manages to frustrate your command, what kind of power must lie behind this man Jesus who is so afraid of death? I'm telling you the truth. If he shows this kind of ability as a human being, then he must truly be all powerful and divine. None can stand against such strength. And if it is, as you allege, that he said he feared death, he only said it to deride and ridicule you, with an eye towards seizing you with his hand of strength. And woe to you forevermore. Good.
So yeah, but again, according to the wisdom that's given to him, there's a syntax there. So when he says things like, for example, there's a distinction between Jesus Christ and Christ Jesus. If you imagine Jesus being the fleshly aspect, right? Again, this was the name given to him at his circumcision, right? And that's the cutting off of flesh. And then Christ is that which is revealed by the Father, because Peter could not have uttered that or understood that, right, unless it was given to him by the Father. He says, flesh and blood has not revealed this to you, but my Father which is in heaven. So that is that which Christ is that which you get from the Father in heaven and not from flesh and blood. So flesh and blood, Jesus, if you will, is what people say about him. They say
The
that he's
fleshly understanding.
Jeremiah,
Mm-hmm.
one of the prophets come back to life. That is who men say that he is, right? So that's Jesus. That's him as defined by men, right? So what what okay, and then that is contrasted with the Christ, to come to understand him as the Messiah, as our Savior. In other words, the salvific significance of him, his higher nature. In other words, that's that which pulls us out of what men say and brings us up to the level where the Father is speaking to us direct. Right, is to understand him on the heavenly level, that which comes from the Father and not from flesh and blood. In other words, right. So Jesus is what men say about him, essentially, and Christ is what the Father says about him, right, which is revealed by the Father. So if you understand those two basic concepts, when you say Jesus Christ, you're going from what men say up to the level of Christ, which is what the Father says. And when Paul speaks of Christ Jesus, he does this very interestingly. If you follow his logic, sometimes he says one, sometimes he says another. It
Mm-hmm.
isn't because it's random. It's because he's speaking according to a wisdom that's given to him by the Father, right? Which some people, who do not have an understanding, wrestle with, right? Peter reveals this to us about the nature of the wisdom that God gave him, is that
Is
people
it
wrestle with it to their own destruction. So
AC,
obviously they haven't
AC,
mastered.
ACJN, I think, is the Acts of John, John's vision of the cross of light. Jesus tells John, he says, um, your reasoning, therefore, ought to begin with the word. Then you will come to perceive the Lord. And in the third place, the man. So there's three things: the word, the Lord, and the man. So there's a way to recognize the levels of what he was showing you, basically, is kind of what Paul was saying, the Christ and the Christ and then the Jesus, the man, basically. The higher level and the
Like it,
lower level.
yeah, and there's some things you'll recognize right away. Like you hear the Lord Jesus Christ, right? But you never hear the Lord Christ Jesus, right? Like
Hmm.
it doesn't even sound right. Like I don't know if you've ever heard that, but nobody ever
No,
says that,
no, they
right?
don't.
Because it doesn't pertain. Because when he's on his lower level, what men say about him, he's Jesus, right? But the whole time that he's on the level of the flesh, he's carrying with him all of this higher level meaning. And so what
Hmm.
happens to him happens also to the word. Happens also, see, because he is the way, so it happens to the way, right? The truth, so it happens to the truth, right? He is the life, so it happens to the life, right? The life of the scriptures dies with him, the way of the scriptures dies with him, the truth of the scriptures dies with him, but it's also resurrected with him, right?
Right, right.
Because the heavenly is couched in the earthly, and the earthly can remain earthly because it contains still within it the heavenly, right? And so because the heavenly is couched in the earthly, right? As long as men look at it in terms of earthly, earthly, earthly this and earthly that, right? It will at least be preserved. And so over time it will persist. Again, Thomas speaks to this as well. He says, you know, the light of the Father is hidden in his image,
Hmm.
right? Because what are these? They're images, they're representations, but they carry with them higher level meaning. So that is the light that is contained with the image. Men see the images, but they do not see the light that is contained within those images, right?
Hmm.
So, you know, you see images of the swine, you see images of the dogs, you see the images that the Pharisees and are like the dogs, right? You see the images of how, you know, the swine are like the Christians because there's 2,000 of them and there's 2,000 years left in the Christian age. And so these associations are made, but people don't see the light in those images, right? But because you see the light in the images, right? It's because your heart and your mind have been changed so that you have the mind of Christ, right? And he himself becomes you. That's him coming to dwell in your understanding, and so that you then become his members. He becomes you. You speak his words, you speak his understanding with the mind that he gave you, right? You work with the hands that, you know, your hands become his hands, your works become his works. That's why I'm saying put your hand to the plow, because if he wants to work, he's going to do it through you. Because again, the
Right.
onus is on us, right? So the idea is that this is to bring you to that realization and also to give you power. Because once you have this power, you can usurp the authority because you appeal to a higher authority and because you have a more sure word of prophecy, right?
Hmm.
Again, that shines like a lamp that shines like a light that shines in a dark place. Again, the light shines and the darkness did not overtake it, right? So John is a witness, right? The idea is that that the word is eternal. And once you can begin to point out its eternity, right, in ways that are definite and understandable to people who are believers or unbelievers, it leaves the realm of arbitrary faith and personal belief and you know, private understanding, if you will, and moves into
Like is that like when he says when they bring you before kings and princes or what and judges, don't recite what you will say, but it will be given to you, type of thing.
yeah, you got a whole you're a whole other creature. You've been delivered from your old sins, and now you can see, if you will, afar off. You can see the end from the beginning. You can see the beginning from the end. You can see the encoding, and you can see the decoding, and you're able to recognize the mechanism. Again, I keep going back to the mechanism. You know, you could talk about cosmology, you can talk about demonology, you could talk about genealogy, you can talk about all kinds of different aspects, right? But this is the thingamabob that does the job, so to speak. This is the thing that gets you there. Because see, look, it doesn't matter it doesn't matter what the cosmology is. It doesn't, and none of that stuff matters if you can bring it down to this essential teaching. This book says it's not for his time, but it's for a time of the coming, right? So it's out of circulation, out of pocket, and for a long time out of existence, as far as
Mhm.
we can know, right? And then all of a sudden it's like, oh, wait a minute. So this book that we've had for 2000 years, what it's really saying is that this is ancient, is prophetic, right? That it comes from the apostles, right?
Mhm.
You know, and this is why in Revelation it says, there's this little book. Why
Right.
is it little, right? Well, you talk about the little fish versus the big fish, right? The little book is little because it's constrained. It's the canon. And that's why when you eat it, it's sweet in your mouth because it's true enough. All those words are inspired. But in your belly, it's bitter because there's more to say. And so that's why he says, well, you know what? Now you must preach again before nations and peoples and tongues and kings, right?
Mhm.
Because it's not just that little book, it's a very big book, right? And
Right,
it's,
right. Yeah, Liz McGee said that. Thank God that he only made the canon because he couldn't carry around a Bible like this. I thought it was pretty funny. Carry
no,
around all the different books. There's like thousands of them.
but this is why we're children of the day, because it's as clear as day.
Hmm.
It's as clear as day. It's absolutely that. There's no question about it. And sooner or later it'll catch on. But like I said, there's variables there because he says speed is coming. That very much implies that there's things that we could do to make this thing happen faster. One of the things that Jesus says, shout it from the rooftops.
Hmm.
One, right? And as far as its effectiveness is concerned, there's the spiritual teaching of, eat whatever they place before you and heal the sick among them. So if this is something that appeals to atheists, to Muslims, you can even play this game. You say, okay, so you don't believe, right? But what does it say? Right? You don't have to believe it. You could read it though, right? What's it telling you? Right? It's telling you that it's ancient. Well, you don't have to believe it, but that's what it's telling you, right? It's telling you it's prophetic. You don't have to believe it, but that's what it's telling you, right? It is telling you. So that's the objective side of it. That's what it's saying objectively, right? You can accept it or reject it subjectively, but the fact is that it turns the whole argument on its head. It turns the whole history of the teaching on its head. I mean, these books were separated in the canon. You don't even have Jude. I mean, of all places, Jude should follow Second Peter at
Right,
least. Come
right.
on,
Yeah, but
it should be
Enoch
there
says,
somewhere in close proximity.
but Jude is the lock, Peter is the key, and what it unlocks is the fact that Enoch is true. And so if they're defending it as being true, what it says in the first part, the first like opening of Enoch, it says this book isn't for this generation, but a remote one when all the wicked and ungodly are going to be removed and the elect will be living in that time. And so you just ask yourself, what happened to the book of Enoch? It was taken away from us. So exactly what Enoch prophesied happened. It wasn't for then, so that it was taken out and then it was given back to us exactly when it said it would be given back to us. And so it fulfilled itself. So it's prophetic, like it said it was.
Yeah, well, he was not, for God took him, right?
Right.
So
Right.
God took the book. I mean, he took it and he gives it back, right?
Right. But I mean, honestly, Robert, like you and I could be alive when they come and preach in Israel against the Antichrist. That's possible. You know what I mean? And what happens if people listen to what we're saying in a couple of years when that happens? All the
Well,
things we're talking
we'll
about
see
right
it
now.
happen. I'm not worried about that.
No, but no,
There's a
I'm saying we are having this conversation right now, and people could literally see them talking in Israel, Enoch and Elijah. We don't know what they're going to say when they get here. They could be talking about themselves and their books that were preserved for the elect. You know what I'm saying? Like what they prophesied could be talked about by them in Israel. Enoch and Elijah could be saying, "You guys didn't defend my book. You didn't do what you were supposed to do." He could be talking to the Christians. He could be talking to whoever. You know what I mean? Out loud. What are they going to say when they get here? Is my question. I'm just hypothesizing. And people out there in the world could come back and try to find any information they could find about Enoch, and this might come up, is what I'm saying. This discussion that we're having right this second could come up about that. You see what I'm saying? Like that,
Yeah,
that
it's
if
unquestionable that it should have happened by now. To see that these people, okay, so as far as there being across time and space, that's an interesting thing that happens at the Transfiguration as well. You know, when you see Moses and Elijah, for example, at the Transfiguration, right? Um, it's not thoroughly explained just how that happened, whether they're there. It says that they're there in their exalted form, right? Which could mean that this is a transport of the spirit, right? But is clearly a transport across space and time on some level or other, even if it is just a spiritual manifestation. You know, the idea is that Moses and Elijah very much could have been sitting in their own time. Maybe they're in meditation, maybe they're in a trance, maybe they're in a dream, maybe they're something, maybe they're yanked out of themselves. We don't see that end of it, right?
Mhm.
But we see them there,
Well, it
right?
happened like the ascension of Isaiah type thing, like where he was like just talking to all the other minor prophets and the king or whatever, and then he was brought up to heaven, like in the spirit or whatever. And even when they were cutting him in half, he was still speaking in the spirit, like that type of thing.
I mean, that's something that I mean some of us will probably eventually come into context. It'll make sense.
Mhm.
But until then, I mean, Paul talks about it. He talks about a taken up
Taken
out
up
of
to the
his
third
body,
heaven.
and his body he could
I
tell
do
you,
not know. Yeah.
right? We assume it's him. He says that he knows a man who was, but knowing Paul, he's talking about himself. But
Yeah,
anyway,
but what is it? What is the which book is it that where Paul goes to heaven and he meets Enoch and Enoch was crying and he's like saying, "Why are you crying?" And he's like, "Because the people on earth don't understand the precious promises that God has in store for the righteous," or something like that.
oh yeah, I know what you're talking about. I can't
I think
remember.
it's Apocalypse of Paul or something.
Yeah, that's right. That's right.
When you find some guy finds his shoes buried in the ground or whatever, and it has a book with it or something like that.
Yeah. Um. Yeah. Yeah. I mean, but the issue is that okay. So like one of the ways I think you understand about time too is that like there's the experience of time, and I think there's time itself. I think time itself is sort of fixed. The way I generally explain this, um, you know, uh, is that like for example, if you have a Blu-ray or a DVD or something, right? You realize that when you're holding it in your hand, right, as a movie, all it is ones and zeros. That's really all it is. It's formats and ones and zeros, and there's coders and decoders and stuff like that that exist within the mechanism or whatever. But if you sit down and watch this movie or whatever, you have this experience of time and space, maybe, where you're in the movie
Because
and
the
you're
movie's played
thinking
linearly or
about it.
whatever. Mhm.
Yeah, because I mean, when you're there in that movie, generally speaking, you're right there in that movie, and you're thinking of it in terms of time and space. But in actuality, all it is just ones and zeros,
Mhm.
and so it's difficult for us to even tell with some man-made thing what reality actually is sometimes, because it's easy to get absorbed into things sometimes, especially things you really like and are interested in. You kind of get sucked into them, and unless something pulls you out, you're just kind of there, sort of captures you, sort of puts you in its spell, so to speak.
Mhm.
And realities like that, if the milieu is that, and again, like I was talking about, just in terms of darkness, you have darkness by default. I sometimes say this as sort of a joke. If the speed of light is so fast, but the speed of darkness is faster because it was already there, right? I mean, and it's kind of a joke because it didn't really go there or travel there or get there or whatever. It's just sort of there by default.
Mhm.
There is darkness. So, like, why would anybody in any kind of rational way expect for there to be this missing book with this mechanism that exists to bring it back into a fold? And why would anybody think to expect that? You know what I'm saying? Why would anybody, you know what I'm saying? Imagine that that would be the case enough for that to have been something that they ever thought of. So the darkness was sort of built into our existence because there's no way in a world of quote unquote chance, in a world of evolution, and in a world of, you know, man's reason or whatever, that you would have a God that was so attentive to detail that he would write out a book that would predict the future, you know what I'm saying, to the nth degree, and then actually pull it off across space and time, you know, in the background, going on behind the scenes of everything that we're, you know, doing in our world and our, you know what I'm saying? It's not something that you would even conceive of. You know what
Hmm.
I'm saying? So people just aren't going to be thinking along those lines to begin with. It's too far outside of people's understanding or anything they could reasonably expect to be true. And yet there it is. You know, that's the sort of pulling you out of your drunkenness, pulling you out of your stupor, that
Well, that's
this is
why
like
we have to shout it from the rooftops type of thing. Because if you don't shout it from the rooftops, they're never going to know that it exists, basically, because it's right there and still nobody notices it.
well, we know that it was a powerful thing because they had to stamp it out.
Yeah.
Remember, they knew they knew,
You said it was
they
self-evident, so the devil had to enter into the church because it was so self-evident that if he didn't get into the church and become part of it and take it over, that it would just
yeah,
be there and everyone would notice it because it's so
that's why
self-evident.
that's why you had to do it quickly. You
Yeah.
know, that's why it had to happen early on because imagine it had stretched out you know, 1,000 years or something. There would have been a lot of time for a lot of people to have written about it and for the mystery to have been leaked, you know, and had gotten
Yeah.
out. But if there were people, see, like if this teaching were, again, you have to go back to the clue that he gives us. They knowingly turned their back on the sacred command that was handed down to them. It would have been better for them not to have known the way of truth, the way of righteousness, right? So they did know, right? And they did turn their back, and it was willful, right? And it was deliberate, and it was according to the satanic arts of constraining people's thoughts. And
It's
that's
like
what
it's like oblivion, like it talks about in the Nag Hammadi Codices, what the devil is. It's oblivion. It's like the never-ending darkness. You know what I mean? Like, or what? It's just like total darkness and like the lack of knowledge. It's almost like the devil, like he can't even comprehend his own idiocy or something like that. If that makes, I don't know if that makes sense. That's the way I look at it when I read it.
well, it's a fool's errand to go up against God, for one
Right,
thing.
right, right. Exactly. That's what
Um,
I'm saying.
just just on the face of it. But if you were gonna go, I mean, I'm not gonna try to. Don't get me wrong. I mean, I'm no devil's advocate in this. When you read what it says in the book of Revelation, you know that the devil is given power to overcome the saints. He's given to do all of these things. You know, he's not 10 feet tall, man. He's not making this stuff happen. You know, it's God is judging us. You know,
Mm-hmm.
and Satan's probably just over there. Hey, look at so and so. Look at all this, huh? You know, he knows this, but he's doing that, right? How's about that, right?
Mm-hmm.
And
Just
God's
like that's
probably
what the
like, you know what? You know what? He's
that's
in
what
here.
the fallen angels said about us. That's what they were laying. The reason the fallen angels were allowed to come down here in the flesh in the first place is because they were laying accusation against us. And God said to them, "You're made out." He said to the fallen angels, "You're made out of two elements. They're made out of four elements. If you go down there in the flesh, you're going to do way worse stuff than they're going to do." And they said, "No, we won't." He's like, "Fine, go ahead." So as soon as he goes, "If you go down there, you do what I said not to do. You're screwed. Basically, you're screwed." They like went down there, and as soon as they got down there, they had sex with all the Cain's line. As soon as they went down, which created the giants. And a lot of people don't know that story. That's why I said it. But like that to me is insane. That the punishment against the fallen angels is so bad that even Michael, the archangel, was like, "Whoa, whoa! Like who can bear this judgment?" And he's talking to like one of the other angels, Raphael or something. It's like, can you imagine that? Can you imagine
There's
that?
a
Like, it's a nuts,
there's a finality to it.
right? It's
There's
scary,
a
bro. It's so
temporality
scary.
to it, which is followed by the finality, and then of
But
course
that's the
that
fear. That's the fear of
finality.
God. That's the fear of God. Like they don't even have the fear of God, man. How can you like see God in heaven and not have fear of Him? That's crazy to me.
Well, I mean, again, like when when Adam and Eve ate of the forbidden fruit, right? I mean, there were things that they did prior to actually eating them, right, that were disobedient. You
Right.
know, to even listen to the serpent, to follow, to even entertain the idea,
Right.
right? That
I
says
know.
that when you sin, you don't sin because of him. You're enticed by your own, the
Lust. Yep.
devil, because we are here to be tested. I mean, it
Mhm.
flat out says that in the book of Revelation. It talks about the church of the Philadelphians. It says, "Listen, I'm going to keep you from the time, that is there to test the people who dwell on the earth." In other words, these people whose earthly understanding, is their paradigm.
Yep.
And because the earthly understanding is their paradigm, they reject the book of Enoch on the basis that it's a cleverly concocted fable that came about by the will of man. And it was not, written in old times, and it was not inspired by the Holy Spirit. And then Peter takes the opposite view. He takes the opposite stance. He fights for the faith that Jude was saying we should fight for. He actually carries that out. And in so doing, by encoding according to the wisdom God gave him, right? Because he compares the wisdom that God gave him with the wisdom that God gave Paul. In other words, sort of parenthetically, right? He's saying
Hmm.
that he's writing according to a certain way so that we could have this remembrance. He wants us to recall the words that were spoken in the past by the holy prophets, right? Men of old spake as they were moved by the Holy Spirit, right? He's telling us it's Enoch. He's telling us in a way that can only be understood if you believe him, right? If you don't believe him, your mind is blinded to this stuff. That's what the canon does. If he goes outside of the lines, all of a sudden, it's like you have to negate, you have to negate, you have to negate, and
I
just
don't
that.
I don't like I don't like people that tell me what to do though. I don't like it when like I got a problem with that like cuz maybe it's cuz I went to Christian school my whole life, but like I really have a hard time with people that tell me I can't do something. So when they tell you that you can only read certain books, I'm like, "Okay, why?" And then you go and read all just the 14 apocryphal books. Why did they take those books out? Why would they do that? Maccabees talks about the abomination of desolation, like and what happened during that time and the Maccabean wars and stuff like that, and how holy men of God fought against men that were doing idol worship and stuff. Like evil men were like forcing people to worship idols. And then you have Tobit, which talks about Raphael and the demon Osmodeus or whatever his name was, who's the same demon that's in the Testament of Solomon. And then you find out that the demonic kingdom is in the ocean in that book. Then you read let's see Bell and the Dragon, which has Daniel in it, another book about idol worship that gets proven like that idol worship is evil. Then you read the Testament of Job, which is not in the Apocrypha. That's about idol worship, and the reason Job was tested in the first place is because Satan was indwelling inside of the idol that was in the church down the street. And Job's like, I'm the king here. Why can't I get rid of that? So he gets rid of the idol that Satan's in. And then Satan comes and tempts him because God allows it to happen because he pre-told Job that he was going to be tested. Everybody's like, oh, God's unfair. He made all that stuff happen to Job. Job knew he was going to be tested. He was allowed to be tested. And that's the thing is it's almost like they took out all the different books and stories that prove that God is fair and he does certain things to test us so that we can show that the righteous people, the people in this world that love God and are righteous, this is what God's people do and this is what Satan's people do. This is what Cain does, this is what Abel does. And when we get to the end and the judgment is final and things like that, you're going to see the product of God's people and the product of Satan's people, in my opinion. This is exactly what you said. This is a giant judgment upon the face of mankind. And most people are failing right now. But like it said in the text that you were just reading in Second Peter, I think, that God doesn't want all of us to perish. He wants us all to be saved. So in this last times, he's giving us these books back so that it can be a healing of the nations, so that in this healing of the nations, there can be this great harvest where the souls that he died for on the cross can actually find out what he really truly did that was taken away from us because they crucified the word. And in that place, you realize who Jesus the man was, who Christ our God is, and how there's different levels to this thing, and there is a third testament, a third dispensation. Matthew 13:33, the woman, the Ruach HaKodesh, the Holy Spirit, took three measures, and on basically the bread rose, and that's what it is. The bread, the word of life, God, Jesus, is rising. And what do you know? A day is as 1,000 years, it says in Peter. And so we have 1,000, 2,000, and we're in the third day right now, which is also the seventh day since Adam. So we're in the Sabbath, and we're in the third day, which is basically the 2,000 years that were given over to the pigs, the false Christians. And now we're in the third day, which is now the time for all this to be revealed. Go ahead.
Well, I mean, I hope this is revelation enough for people to, to shout it from the rooftops. Because again, this is a real foot in the door as far as having a place at the table. Because again, if you're going to argue the same old arguments that people have been arguing, obviously we're not going to get anywhere with it. We have really a more sure word of prophecy. We've been given that. And that's it's been pointed out to us that that is the case. So with a more sure word of prophecy, we should be able to stand our ground against anyone who comes against us, right? Or else we
Absolutely.
don't, right? But I'm
Robert,
seeing that
Robert,
we do.
before I let you go, I just wanted to give out your website, scriptural-truth.com, and also your YouTube, apocrypha 1970. And Robert's doing a really great series right now with a local church talking about all this stuff. And it's, if you watch it from the beginning to now, it's very, very much compounded on itself, where it's explained things that actually, even though I talk to Robert quite often and listen to all of his previous work, I've actually learned a lot of things from this series. So if you have time, check that out. And if you have time, I would recommend Robert's series on Paul and all his writings, and the description of Revelation is also a great series too. His two works on YouTube. One is the Super Gospel audio, 16 hours. You can also purchase the book on his website, and you can also check out, what's it called? What's your second work?
The guidebook for the
The
elect.
guidebook for the elect. Go listen to the guidebook for the elect. It's about 4 hours, I think. So profound. Just some of the best things I've ever heard. So everything we talked about tonight is summed up in those things I just mentioned. So also all these extra biblical books are on there in PDF and audio too. So thank you all for coming tonight. I appreciate it. Robert, you can say anything you need to before we go. And God bless and thank you.
Well, okay. Well, thanks a lot. It's great that I have a website, scriptural-truth.com. It's run by a friend of mine, named Rick, who's on YouTube as Jesus Love 723. He runs that website on his own using his own money. So anything you can throw in his direction in support of all the work he's done would be greatly appreciated, and would allow for the site not only to continue but to expand. Also, the church that I do go to, I try to get there at least every week or so. Um, you know, the pastor there, Dr. Stephen Missick, he's an army chaplain and a doctor at that, and he's got the church that he runs that he inherited from his father. um, they could use your support too. I mean, in all honesty, if you watch any of those videos, I give his address and everything there at the end. If you want to throw any resources in that direction, I know he can use it. That churches give me the opportunity to speak to the body of Christ, which I know I could make videos of my on myself, alone or whatever, but there's really nothing like being in the presence of other people and being in the presence of other believers. And the thing is that if you watch those things, you'll realize that people are engaged in those conversations.
Mm-hmm.
You know, maybe we talk over each other sometimes or whatever, but it's a dialogue, and it's a group of people who, are spiritually mature and ask intelligent questions and think about things deeply. And that's something that's very refreshing to think that in this age, you've got what amounts to a ready-made group of people who most of which have listened to these things before and have some knowledge of them because
Yeah.
they sort of exist in the ether right now. They are in the conversation right now when people talk about scriptural fulfillments. A lot of times I'm surprised to see how much they bring up these books, then they read them just alongside the canonical books. But a lot of that's just people's own, I hate to use the term private interpretation. They believe it because it rings true with them, because their hearts burn within them or whatever. But what I'm trying to show you is that there's actual objective um, ways in which that you can show that these books are inspired, and that these arguments work whether you're a believer or not. So they exist more in the realm of knowledge even than faith. And so that's a real sign that we're in those times, because
Mm-hmm.
when the Bible starts to have relevance to people outside of the believers and starts to have relevance in the world of the unbelievers, that's sort of the foreshadowing of his judgment, because he's saying, hey, listen, you see this power, right? You see I was able to call the end from the beginning, right?
Mm-hmm.
You see that, right? You see that I got the power, to take you and to do what I want to do with you, right? Maybe you should listen, right?
Right.
Maybe you should heed a warning. So when you begin to recognize that he's taking his power and he's taking his reins, you're not going to hold it back.
Right.
He placed that door before you, no man can shut it. He says that himself. Now that it's open, it ain't shutting again. And the
Mm-hmm.
truth is going to come out. And so you're going to have to choose one side or the other. So these are times when what else is entailed with that? I mean, isn't the fall of Babylon and the coming down of Jerusalem, isn't the one sort of fall on the heels of the other?
Yep.
People are starting to see through the falsity of this world. People are starting to question the veracity of things that they've been told, and even our own institutions that we've always sort of taken for granted that we can trust. We've come to realize that they're stabbing us in the back and they're lying to our face, and they're all on the same page, and the very many are being controlled by the very few, and that the power and that sort of thing is sort of dependent on their ability to deceive. And if you're able to open up people's eyes enough to where they recognize that there are liars and there are deceivers, and they exist on all levels of society, including your religion, including your churches, you know, and they've been there forever. They've been there for a very long time. There's always been this opposition. Wherever there have been people who have spoken the truth in biblical history and in secular history for that matter, they've always been shut up. It's just the state of man, but when the time comes, when the Lord determines that it's just as it was in the days of Noah.
Mm-hmm.
When you look at and I'm not here to argue necessarily that they had exactly the same technology or the same knowledge, but one of the things that can be said about all of the knowledge we have, like all of the AI and stuff like that, I think we're starting to recognize that if it were possible in prior Earth ages, like let's say that it's possible now to create computers and to create genetic engineering and stuff like that, that it would have been technically possible for them to have done it in the prior Earth age. And it
Yep.
makes sense that they'd want to destroy all the history of that with a flood so that there wouldn't be any going back. But see, the difference was that at the time, the angels were the ones who came down and taught these mysteries direct, the things that men were trying to learn.
Yep.
Uh, Once that happened, it almost happened again with Babylon.
Mm-hmm.
People, where it was said that literally anything they wanted to do, they could have done. And take what you will out of today's technology. If they had had the knowledge then, they could have made computers then, they could have made spaceships then, they could have made artificial intelligence then. You know what I'm saying? If you
Yep.
think about it, because we can do it, if there were other worlds, if there were other civilizations before or now,
Nothing
or
new under the sun.
we know what's possible. We know
Mm-hmm.
that all of this technology brings with it the abuses that we've seen. We
Yep.
know that they're just tools for lying. They're just tools for control. They're just tools for deception, right? And since they are now, they could have been in other times and places in other worlds. What we're exploring is the realm of what's possible, and what we know now is that these things, because they are possible now, they were always possible. They were inherent in the very physics of our universe, and so because of that, when you see that the angels came down and they taught all of these things, you can kind of get a glimpse of the sorts of things that could have been known and could have been taught, could have been historically. And whether they were or not, I'm not necessarily here to argue that. I'm just telling you, because we know that they're used for, malicious purposes now. In every age where human beings could come, or sentient beings could come to these understandings or whatever, there will always be these abuses, there will always be these deceptions, there will always be propaganda, there will always be force, there will always be misinformation, there will always be, what I'm saying.
Mm-hmm.
These are the things that keep societies going and have always kept societies going, because people buy into them, or they really have no choice but to abide by them at the very least. But we're sort of at a precipice, I think, in a society. It's very comforting to know that as we see society falling apart, we see these mechanisms in place for our salvation,
Right.
right? So as
Mm-hmm.
the one collapses and falls to the ground because nobody buys it anymore, they're not buying the wood, they're not buying the slaves and the souls of men like it speaks of in Revelation, right? As that collapses, right, the Jerusalem comes down out of
Right.
heaven onto
Can't
the
wait.
earth.
I'm happy.
So that's the good news that we're bringing to the world, that there is a new Jerusalem and that it's coming down out of heaven, even as Babylon falls, and that the strong man has been bound, and that the sword has gone through the wall of, his house, and he has pushed it through,
Mhm.
and judgment begins at the house of God, and now you can see how that works.
It's
But see
happening right
also,
now, like as we speak, it's happening all
well,
over the news too.
but it's also salvation.
Right.
See, the it's a very constructive sort of destruction, if you will, because
Mm-hmm.
as the one falls, there's the framework for the other, and that's the
Mm-hmm.
hope. That's the real hopefulness of this entire message, is that if you see it, it's real to you. You can see the eternity in it, and you can actually see the hand of God. And that's what I'm saying. Anybody with any kind of sense, any kind of reasoning, can come to this conclusion, whether they're religious or not,
Right.
so that people in the world can see the objective truth of God's reality.
Absolutely. Amen. Thank you, Robert. I appreciate it.
That's all.
God bless you and your family, and I hope you have a great night. And thanks for all that you do.
All right, good. Good night.
Thanks, Robert.